I'd like to go ahead and convene the City Council meeting for August 18th. Can the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Berman.
Here.
Councilmember Burt. Councilmember Holman. Here. Councilmember Klein. Here. Vice Mayor Niss. Here. Councilmember Price. Councilmember Scharf. Here. Councilmember Schmidt. Here. Mayor Shepard. 7 present.
All right, this is our annual meeting with our county supervisor for North County. Joe Simidian is here with us tonight. We've given him some topics that we would like to have him think about, but before we kick this off, we wanted to go ahead and do a little presentation for him as a thank you from our city to him for one of the things that you did for us for what's happening in Palo Alto.
Good evening, members of the council and Supervisor Simidian. Greg Betts, Director of Community Services. And on behalf of the Friends of the Magical Bridge, the community, and the Friends of Palo Alto Parks, I just want to thank you again for being a pace setter in the contribution of $150,000 from the Park Charter Fund towards the Magical Bridge project. Since the groundbreaking just a matter of weeks ago, the dirt has been flying at Mitchell Park. We're very, very fortunate to have a great builder, a lot of staff on the project site, and if you were to go out to Mitchell Park, you'll see that substantial construction has been made to the pathways on both sides of the bridge to make it more ADA accessible. But I want to tell you that this is the second time in the last 10 years we've been able to receive funds from the Park Charter Fund, from the county. And it makes a huge difference. Your gift was really a pace setting for the Friends of the Magical Bridge. It was the boost, both psychologically and financially, that they really needed. They have met their financial goal and, in fact, have exceeded it. And I really appreciate the credence that you've given this project. And it will be an inspiration to the other parks in Santa Clara County. We are still targeting on being under budget and on time by Christmas time. So again, on behalf of staff and the community, we really thank you for your leadership.
Thank you very much, and more to the point, thank you to everybody who has been part of making this really quite extraordinary thing happen. Any of us who've ever raised money for anything, I think, know that you get to a certain point where you're wondering where the next dollar is going to come from when you've got almost everything done, but not quite. And in this case, when we became aware of that in my office, we had a thought, and fortunately my 4 colleagues on the Board of Supervisors were all agreed that this really is a project of regional significance and therefore an appropriate beneficiary of the Park Charter Fund. So again, my thanks. I had a wonderful time at the groundbreaking. If you couldn't feel good that day, you can't feel good. That was kind of my take on the morning, and I'm looking forward to being there when the time comes to cut the ribbon or whatever official function we have. But again, I really do think people will come to see this as a regional benefit and a regional facility, and there's always the question then, how do you mitigate the costs associated with serving a larger community? And I thought this was a modest way we could at least make sure there was some recognition of the regional use of the project when it's finally done. So congrats to you all, and I'm looking forward to being there in December. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, and we do have one speaker for your time with us tonight, so I'm going to go ahead and take that up. Are you ready? Okay, good. This is Cybele Lovuelo Bouchon. You have 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. So briefly, I'm appealing to Supervisor Simidian and to the City Council and to other leaders who might be present to ensure that there is a cold weather shelter founded somewhere in the North County area. That's 6 cities. That's Sunnyvale, Palo Alto, Mountain View, Los Altos Hills, Cupertino. I think that covers it. And basically we've had deaths last winter. Winter will approach. We have beautiful weather now, but it's in the air that autumn is approaching. So I think this is giving you all an opportunity to, again, be a trendsetter, a leader, of excellence and model something. Work with the state, work with these cities, work with all the other county supervisors, and show us what you can do, because I think you'll do something great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And so I'd like to just go ahead and let you launch into the summarized list that we have, if you see it on the agenda, or if you'd like to, if you miss something, believe me, one of my colleagues will catch up with you.
Got it.
And we will go into question and answer afterwards.
Thank you. There's absolutely no reason why council members will recall, but last year when I was with you, I was fighting off a really bad cold and felt I was a little off my game. And of course, that was the night that the community decided to come out in great numbers. I'm feeling healthy as can be, and we have a more modest crowd tonight. But what I thought I would do is just revisit very briefly the observation I made last year, which was when I came back to the board as in essence, a recycled board member. People said, "So what do you plan to do when you get there?" And the short version was that I sort of had three goals in mind as a returning member of the board, having served there from 1997 to 2000 prior to Vice Mayor Niss's 12-year tenure on the board. And sort of number one was just to make sure that the place runs well, both in terms of careful use of taxpayer dollars and the good delivery of services. The 5 members of the board, as you all know, are actually responsible for running the enterprise, just as you are with their professional staff. And so it was very different after 12 years in the legislature, having been a policymaker and a lawmaker, to show up and actually have to deliver services on a daily basis at the county government, just again, as you do here at city government. So as I say, whether it was the way we spend our money, whether it was the way we deliver our services, to try and make sure that we did the very best job that was possible. Second, just coincidentally, my return to the board was simultaneous with the launch of the Affordable Care Act. And so one of the things that I said was, when the opportunity comes, if and when it comes, I wanted to be in the middle of that, and have in fact had a chance to serve on the Health and Hospital Committee over this last year and a half, and it's been a bit of a roller coaster ride, but the county plays a key role in terms of the implementation of the Affordable Care Act, particularly with respect not only to folks who are newly enrolled in the exchanges that you've all been hearing about, but even more so, I would say, with the folks who are now part of the effort to expand Medi-Cal here in California. So healthcare, both for folks in the marketplace, but also for people of modest means, has been sort of a huge item number 2 on my 3-item list. And the third item was, which is sort of more broad and it goes a little bit to the issues that were just raised by the member of the public, was to be a good district supervisor. And this was something I learned my first time through the board, which was very different than my prior service as a school board member here in Palo Alto, where I represented the entire district, as a city council member and mayor in Palo Alto, where I represented the entire city. When you are one of 5 district supervisors, if you don't look out for your district, nobody else will. And that's not a criticism. They have pressing matters in their districts. They are knowledgeable, the other 4 members are knowledgeable about the issues and the circumstances and the challenges in their district. So one of the things that was on my 3-item list was to make sure that I was mindful of the needs of our district. Now, that presents some challenges on at least 2 fronts. One is that we are just geographically remote from the center of the county, from the county seat. And so while we may not feel on any given day that we have a lot in common with Gilroy or Morgan Hill, I can tell you actually that they feel our pain in the sense that they are also at the other end of the county and somewhat remote by local standards from the center of the action in San Jose. And on a host of issues, whether it's transportation, where all of a sudden we bump into that arbitrary county line with San Mateo County, which to folks who are trying to move up and down the peninsula doesn't mean anything. But in terms of jurisdiction and service, all of a sudden it presents some challenges. Or some of the other social services that we're trying to provide, where the question arises, well, you know, wouldn't we be better off if these were centralized somewhere closer to San Jose? So simple geography is part of the challenge. I think the larger challenge, and I know that Vice Mayor Niss confronted the same challenge during her tenure on the board, is that there is a perception that there are no needs in the North County. And of course, in fact, we are a blessedly prosperous place, and other parts of the county do have dramatically greater need. I haven't looked at the numbers recently, but I remember back in the 90s when I served with Supervisor Blanca Alvarado, her 1/5 of the county had 45% of the welfare population. The 1/5 that I represented had 4.5% of the welfare population. And yet, and I haven't had a chance to check the numbers more recently, but it gives you some sense of the contrast between different parts. So it was always a bit of a challenge to say, you know, I really need your help. As I walk the mean streets of Palo Alto every day, we face the following set of struggles. That being said, both all those years ago and now today, I think my colleagues have been pretty open-minded and pretty willing to listen to a rational, fact-based articulation of the admittedly more modest need, but nonetheless the fact that there is real need in the North County district that I represent, and quote, even in Palo Alto, as a phrase that sometimes gets used in our office when we're having these conversations. So if I can just segue from there to the homeless issues, some of you will know, I suspect most of you know, that there was a plan to, which is underway and being implemented, to raise the old Sunnyvale Armory, which had been serving as a cold weather shelter from the first Monday after Thanksgiving through the end of March. And that site has served for decades as a cold weather shelter for those roughly 4 months. And the site is being redeveloped in Sunnyvale as a housing complex, including some affordable housing and including some housing that's specifically geared towards folks who have previously been homeless. But it raised, I thought, the obvious question of where do those 125 to 135 people put their heads down during the cold and, in most years, wet months. The county had adopted a strategy which I think makes sense, but I thought was perhaps unduly ambitious, called Housing First, and the notion was that the county would make an effort to seek out people who had the greatest level of need, who were frequent users of county social services, and get them housed so that they could sort of pull their lives together and be self-sufficient over time. It is I think, sensible, in other words, let's just really focus on solving the problem rather than treating the symptoms with either a food bank or a cold weather shelter. I think in many respects that model makes sense in terms of really trying to, quote, solve the problem and address the underlying issues. But I thought one of the best analogies I heard was somebody said, well, it's a little like saying we're going to focus on preventative health care, but until we get that really resolved, we're going to close down all the emergency rooms in the meantime. And my take pretty quickly was, it's great that we're focusing on housing first, it's great that we're focusing on systemic solutions, but meanwhile, we're going to have real people who have not yet been lifted up, made successful, and they're going to need a place to get something to eat and to put their head down during difficult months. Again, I was pleased when I approached my colleague on the board, Supervisor Dave Cortese, who happens to split the city of Sunnyvale with me in terms of our two districts. He was happy to co-author a presentation to our board colleagues saying, let's not think we can just do without a real honest-to-God shelter. Let's try and make sure that while we're doing these other good things, we have a place for folks to go. The board took a unanimously supportive view on that subject and gave direction to our staff to help us find a replacement shelter. Time is our challenge. The council member, some of you have worked with council member, I think Vice Mayor now, Jim Davis in Sunnyvale. He's been just putting tremendous energy into trying to find a replacement site in Sunnyvale that could serve the North County area. I think he discovered that was more of a challenge in the current economy than he had perhaps imagined. He found a city site that he thought might be good for at least a year. Ultimately, his colleagues were not persuaded that the site was right, and so earlier this week, they voted on, I believe, a 7-2 basis to say, not here. So that means we look to Plan B. We had not been counting exclusively on that site, so we had in fact identified a site in Mountain View that made some sense. And just as we were making a plan to sort of pivot to that site, we were advised that someone else had stepped in and put an offer in on the property, and that it appeared that the property was essentially bought out from under us just literally the same day that we were preparing to turn in that direction. All of that is a long preamble by way of saying we're continuing to look for sites somewhere in the North County area that would serve the cities in our region, my district, and it's very much at the top of the to-do list. Related to all of that, more modest but I think nonetheless important effort in the same area, we were able to, through the Measure A process, where some of you will recall we had Measure A funds that the voters voted on to try and help the county through the struggle on social services, to contract with Project We Hope in East Palo Alto for 5 beds that are for Santa Clara County, as well as case management to go with them for 365 days a year. The number is perhaps not dramatic, but if you multiply the 5 beds times 365 nights, it's not inconsequential. Again, something I think Vice Mayor Niss will recall, it's always a little bit of a challenge when you have to go to your colleagues and say, we want to fund a San Mateo County operation to serve Santa Clara County residents. But I thought, once we made the case, clearly my colleagues were there. Other pieces of this, the $250,000 match with the city, which came as a result of the aftermath of the debate about the situation at Coverly. I think that's a sensible approach, and again, the county is quite supportive in terms of saying we will step up with the housing vouchers, you step up with essentially the same amount of funding, but to provide the case management. And one area that may be news to many of you that I think is clearly an overlap is in terms of the North County and Palo Alto in particular. I think all of you know where the North County Courthouse is, that lovely structure at 270 Grant Avenue, where I have a district office, a satellite office. Immediately across the street are a group of low-slung buildings that are oftentimes sort of overlooked, that house a number of county staff. We had some space there, and in cooperation with the public defender, talked about whether or not we couldn't bring some services to that location that would help the population that is, in some instances, homeless, in some instances having mental health problems, in some instances having substance abuse problems, in some instances a combination of those 2 or 3. Because that court has something called the Palo Alto Review Court, where minor offenders are pulled in, and the effort in the court system, working with the public defender and the district attorney, is to say, can we keep this from becoming criminal and find a way to address the underlying causes? And that has worked quite well. It's both good for the folks who go through the system. I think to the extent it addresses sort of the underlying causes, it's actually good for folks in the community who don't want to see some of these quality of life crimes. And what we're doing now is essentially making some space, rehabbing the facility, and we will be pulling in groups that are familiar to many of you, including the Downtown Streets team, some folks from the mental health world, as well as folks working in the homeless arena. And
Joe,
I think that will help.
Between Riachi's and
the
courthouse?
Yes. Vice Mayor Niss is using a culinary reference point, Riachi's, the restaurant. There's a little alley right there that cuts through, and as I say, there are some low-slung, very undistinguished-looking buildings that are right there, and we were actually able, working with the public defenders, as I say, to sort of put the services right there so that literally people will then be able to walk across the street, sit in the courtroom when these cases come up for somebody who may have a drunken disorderly or a violation of some other relatively minor offense, and then work through, before they get there, the plan that they can present to the judge to say, rather than sending this person off to 6 months in the county jail, why don't we say, how about probation on the following conditions with respect to substance abuse counseling, mental health counseling, so on and so forth. So I think it will help the population that we're trying to help here. And why don't I stop there and see if there are any other questions. I think most of you know that the county has, on a countywide basis, millions that it has committed to this problem. But I think in terms of North County, finding a replacement for that shelter, doing the work we're doing at Project We Hope, keeping the match going with Palo Alto, and making sure that the Palo Alto Review Court actually is the beneficiary of services across the street. I think all those things taken together will have a direct impact if we're successful here in Palo Alto and hopefully beyond. Should we stop there?
Sure, I've got a couple lights. And okay. Councilmember Schmidt, is that yours?
Well, Supervisor, you took the words out of my mouth. I also was going to remember last year we had a discussion because the homeless issue was particularly important to us at that time, and we had an extended discussion. And I guess there were 3 results. One you mentioned was the limited number, but some new shelter space for people who are homeless in the North County. 2, the combination of the housing vouchers and the case management that we could work together. And 3, getting county services for local social service things. So I just wanted to say that, recognize that we were quite aware of what was going on, your efforts on that, and as members of the audience pointed out, we're still sensitive around the social services issue. So thank you.
Good.
Councilmember Niss, or Vice Mayor Niss.
So as appreciative as I am, Supervisor Simidian, of all that, and I thank you, Greg, for putting that out so nicely, and all of those make a big difference. But we do have a number of other issues that have come up, and I won't ask you to address them directly tonight, but they're ones that we're hearing about a lot in the city. The first has to do with the Opportunity Center, which, as you recall, is run by 2 different agencies, both the Housing Authority and by Envision. I think perhaps Envision and their new form is kind of finding their way a bit, particularly as it deals with us here in Palo Alto. But I know people have come to us and have been concerned about that. Now, while that's not in your area particularly, although the Housing Authority could be looked at as part of the county, and however, I don't think that's directly under you, it is an area that we are concerned about. The second is we heard this spring from a number of the nonprofits in our community that are very concerned about a drying up of their resources, particularly those that are involved in not only shelter, but in particularly food. So, as I said, we didn't put that on our list specifically for tonight, but that's an area that I'm particularly concerned about. We spent a lot of time in Finance Committee on that, deciding how we could put city money into those nonprofits. But I think long term, we really need to look to the county for that kind of long-term support.
On the housing front, I think, just to be clear for folks who are listening or who are in the chambers, as you will recall, the Housing Authority is a separate legal entity, and so not really in the county's bailiwick in a technical or legal sense or in a structural governmental sense. That being said, some of you may or may not have been mindful of the fact that the Housing Authority took a pretty big whack as a result of the sequestration at the national level. The county government then stepped in with about $1 million in funding to help sort of transition some of those Section 8 voucher recipients into new living situations. It was one of those times, Ms. Niss, where you do say, I think, okay, we can wring our hands about the fact that it's not technically within our purview, but there's a real problem with real people who need real help right now. And so if we could stretch, we wanted to, and we did in that instance. I think in terms of the social service, largest set of social services, and I had a chance to meet with representatives from the Human Relations Commission who came to my office recently to talk about this very topic here in the North County. And what I told them, and this is probably a little more capital P political, but I'll just say it out loud because it's what I said, which was the city's going to try and send you in our direction and get off the hook. The county's going to try and send you in the city's direction and get off the hook. So what you should do is you should just keep coming at both of us and see if we can't find ways to collaborate and get something done without letting everybody say it's somebody else's job responsibility. And that's pretty much the way I have tried to approach these social services issues. The county government isn't city government. The city government, on the other hand, has a limited role in terms of social services. That being said, Palo Alto is rightfully proud of the work that it did with Avenidas, which has a special relationship. Palo Alto is rightfully proud of the relationship it has with PAC, the community child care, where there's a special relationship. So, you know, we all have to be mindful of our roles, but I also think we have to sort of look for opportunities to collaborate. And I'll give you what I thought was an interesting example. Dreamcatchers, who are the folks in the Palo Alto Unified School District working with low-income Palo Alto kids as opposed to youngsters who may be part of the voluntary desegregation program, has identified a need for particular help for low-income kids in Palo Alto, and that's their niche. And they came and said, can you provide some help? And I said, well, you know, we're really not in the public education business, but if we come at this through the low-income angle, I think that a case can be made. But here's what I need you to do. I need you to go back to the Palo Alto Unified School District and tell them that every dollar that we put up, we expect them to match with an increased contribution over and above what they're currently doing, and put a maintenance of effort provision in the relationship so that we know that what we're doing really does supplement rather than supplant district funds. And to their credit, the district said, we will do that. We were able to put what is, by county standards, a relatively modest amount of money. I think we ended up at $30,000, plus 30 from the city, from the school district, and all of a sudden you've got a little more money there to help with the project. Similarly, I know many of you have worked with Racing Hearts, a nonprofit here in Palo Alto. They have looked for other opportunities elsewhere in the county. And again, you know, we're not in the defibrillator business at the county, but we're clearly in the healthcare business, and it seemed to me that we could make a case. So in Mountain View, what we did was say, tell you what, let's see if we can't get $50,000 for defibrillators, but based on a matching grant. And so El Camino Hospital came in with $25,000. The city came in with $25,000, $26,000. The two school districts there came in with another $15,000. And so as a result of the $50,000 county push, will end up sort of moving through Mountain View over the course of the coming year and making sure that that life-saving technology is there. And I'm hoping that that's really just a pilot and we can do it at other places. I use those two as examples because, just to go back to what I said to the Human Relations Commission, push us all. Let's see if we can't find ways to do it. You know, I'll have to say, look, there are limits both to what the county can afford and, quite candidly, to what I can persuade, as you know, 3 colleagues who are necessary, 2 colleagues plus myself, to do, but push us all and let's see if we can't find some opportunities. I don't think a year and a half ago anybody thought that Magical Bridge would be receiving $150,000 in county funds, but the opportunity was there. It was appropriate. There was a demonstrable need, and you know, I think there'll be more opportunities like that.
And perhaps approaching you next spring for that same kind of attention with a match might be a good idea.
Yeah, and I would actually say sooner rather than later. And you all know this as elected officials, and you know, the more you do, the more people say, "Oh, great, let's ask them." They you know, so you know, that just kind of goes with the territory. And I understood that when we worked on some of these various projects that are out there right now, but. As I say, the fact that there are limits, the fact that you can't do it all, doesn't mean you shouldn't do what you can do, and we'll always be able to do more if we can leverage additional funds or find matching grants with partners in government.
Thanks.
Councilmember Berman.
Well, Supervisor Simidian, thank you very much for the recap, for all of the recap, and especially the recap in regards to the efforts that have been underway to find cold weather shelter to help replace the Sunnyvale Armory. And I wanted to ask, you know, through the deliberations in Sunnyvale and also the site that you were looking at in Mountain View, and I'm sorry to hear that those fell through, were there certain criteria that you got that have been identified as necessary for a facility like this? And, you know, could you talk about that a little bit? My hope is that some of the local press might write an article about the efforts that have happened so far, and maybe those criteria that would make for a good facility, and maybe if we throw it out to the community members might have suggestions.
Sure. The previous facility worked for 120 to 135 at its highest number, and we really are talking, and you've got some staff expertise here, by the way, that I want to acknowledge, so if you want to pull them into the conversation, please feel free, obviously, but we're really talking about a pretty bare bones structure. We're not talking a residential structure. We're talking about what is basically a glorified warehouse that then gets retrofitted to meet some of these needs. Now, if it's a place to put mats down on the warehouse. If it has shower and restroom facilities, that's a big plus. If there are separate shower and restroom facilities for men and for women, that's a plus. If there are some office spaces or partitioned areas, both so that maybe a family could have some privacy and or some staff could have privacy. Cooking facilities, that's nice, but again, not essential. And even the bathrooms, we have portable showers now that you can just roll up outside if you need to. So, from my standpoint, the biggest question is, is there a site that is large enough, and then is it in a location that is going to be acceptable to the community? And transportation is an important one there, obviously, if it's remote from, and I have no doubt that long term we will find a fine site. I think right now my greatest anxiety is about the fact that November's not that far off. Mm-hmm. So,
thank you.
Councilmember Holman.
Well, in answering some of the other questions, you've in advance answered part of mine, but I did want to follow up a little bit on the social services for organizations and the funding of that. And maybe in a little bit more fine-grained way, or perhaps ways that you weren't able to address in your previous answer, what ways that the city can coordinate with the county in terms of timing and programs. You mentioned leveraging definitely. So an example is like if the counties, let's put it this way, if an organization comes forward and they want funding, rather than having to go to the county and come to the city and such, if they made a proposal that if we had X number of dollars, we could accomplish X program. So if we look at it from a programmatic standpoint, how the city and the county can together leverage involvement from, say, El Camino Hospital, Stanford, Palo Clinic, that sort of thing, and the timing of that, coordination of that, where it's appropriate and feasible and possible, and also how we might do that even cross-county, if there's any possibility of doing that, because, needs don't stop at county lines. Right. So you mentioned Gilroy, it's in South County, but there's another county adjacent to them, so perhaps your other supervisors might be willing to, embrace a program where, we can work together more regionally and help solve some of these human issues, these very human issues.
I think one of the things that I would say is a plus is the fact that we're on the same finance calendar, so we have the same fiscal year. So unlike the feds, for example, where my recollection is their fiscal year and your fiscal year don't match up, so there's always a little bit of a lag time there. If we work in tandem with our 2 fiscal years that are identical, I think that's a help. I would also say, as I said a minute ago, better to start early, and I don't mean think that we're going to get it all worked out in 2 weeks. I just mean sometimes you need to plant the seed, have a few conversations, rather than show up at the 12th hour with a proposal. I would ask all of you to be mindful of the fact that I represent 7 other communities, so when it comes time for me to try and exercise some influence with my colleagues, I have some other obligations as well. And I do think trying to determine whether or not this is really in the county's bailiwick is a sort of a starting point in the conversation. And we had an interesting conversation as a full board recently where essentially the board said, we don't want to try and be the regional housing agency for Santa Clara County. For better or worse, that really is going to rest with 15 individual cities who will make their own land use decisions. And having said that, are we obviously front and center in the work with homeless populations? We are. So, some of these dividing lines are a little ambiguous. And as I said, sometimes you can find a connection that might not be readily apparent. As I said, with respect to the Dreamcatchers program, I said, hey, we have a clear mandate to work on issues affecting low-income populations, and that was, an obvious one. Health and hospitals is, and then supervisor, now Vice Mayor Niss was the chair of the Health and Hospital Committee, so she's intimately familiar with these things. I mean, there were cutbacks over the recent years at the Mayview community health clinics that serve Palo Alto, Stanford, Mountain View, 3 different clinics. We were able to restore some OBGYN funding there for the perinatal program. That was something that I thought, while there's obviously a question of can we find the funding, that's clearly a part of the core mission of the county. And because we don't have any of the county clinics actually in the 5th Supervisorial District, that we work through those partners. Similarly, and there was reference to the Opportunity Center, I think most of you know that we had a little bit of a push and shove about whether or not we were going to lose our North County Social Service Agency office in Mountain View. I was pleased that we were able to sort that out and keep an office in Mountain View so that people who need those services can get them here rather than to have to take 2-3 buses down to San Jose. But we're having a very interesting conversation right now with the nonprofits, including Envision, about whether or not we can't take the next step, which is to have people from that social service agency shop go out and essentially co-locate, have satellite offices, I call it take their show on the road, to our nonprofit partners in the 6 or 7 different communities that I represent, including Palo Alto. So if you've already got clients at the Opportunity Center who are there working with Envision, doesn't it make sense for a live body from the county to go from the social service agency to that place and then not only have immediate and direct access, but also have the ability to work through what the needs are with somebody else in the nonprofit world who's playing a role. So I think all those opportunities are going to be there. I would say start early, keep in mind the budget calendar, which is similar to your own. Make sure that it really does have some overlap with the work of the county, that it's an appropriate one, and let's see if we can't partner with others. Getting X number of dollars into the mix, if we only have to put up half of that or a quarter of that from the county, is, I think, a great way to go. And I think we saw that with the homeless issue, where Palo Alto, this is my paraphrase, Palo Alto said, hey, we're just one little town, we can't solve the problem. And my reaction was, no, you can't. But on the other hand, everybody has to do their part. And I think Palo Alto did that, and I think that's a great example of what I'd like to see more of.
Just a very quick follow-up to that, because it's incumbent on our nonprofits to get started early too. And so when you say start early, do you have any notion of what start early means, or you just want to follow up with our city staff with that?
Well, your Human Relations Commission apparently thought that a month after the budget was closed down was a good time to start, and I think they were right. With me here, some of you know, but not all of you do, Hema Mohan, who used to be the district director in my office when I was in the state senate, and who now works half-time in my office, and among her duties is she's our nonprofits liaison. So they can always use her as a point of contact, and she'll make sure that they get to the staff member in my office who's responsible for social services or responsible for homeless services, whatever it may be. And we can start those conversations now.
Councilmember Klein.
Thanks, Joe, as usual. And let me start by expressing thanks for a different area than we've talked about so far, where the city and the county interact, and that is the county's transfer of complete ownership of the airport back to the city of Palo Alto. We appreciate your staff's cooperation, and we know that it may have relieved the county from a lot of concerns, but those of us who worked on this issue for the last 6-7 years think that it's really an opportunity for Palo Alto. So in any event, we'll make sure to invite you to all the successful events at the airport celebrating its new good fortune.
Well, I would say congratulations to Palo Alto, this was an issue when I was on the board back in 1997, and at the risk of being a little tactless, the city always felt the county wasn't giving the Palo Alto airport its due. The county always felt that Palo Alto was a little bit high maintenance in its expectations. And so, really, I think this was a sensible solution, which is to say, if you want it to be what you want it to be, here's an opportunity for you to make it what you want it to be. And, in a perfect world, do I wish that we hadn't had that tension, if you will, in years gone by? I do. In the real world, did we? We did. And I think, frankly, this is a pretty good outcome. I suspect you know, I think county staff was out at the airport again today to make sure that there's a smooth handover and transition. And I think they're very professional about wanting Palo Alto to be successful. The other thing I would say is my only role, candidly, was to try and hustle it up a little bit, because I know that grant funding comes in cycles and that you want to be able to access that grant funding sooner rather than later. So, as I say, really the only role I've played is to try and make sure that our team was prepared to hustle it up a little bit, just as your team was prepared to hustle it up a little bit, to make sure we didn't miss a full year in terms of the grant process. And I hope that allows you to get started sooner rather than later with the kind of improvements that you want to see.
Agree 100%. Let me ask you a question that I think Councilmember Price had put on the agenda, and since she's not here, and it's something that I've been involved with as well, and that is proposed 2016 transportation measure, which started out as a proposed 2014 transportation measure. And I think that Council Members Price and Burt and I probably took the most active role in seeing how that financing was going to occur, but now it's been put off for 2 years. It isn't so much of a question to me as, well, the question I'll get to, but just as a background to it, I think that the Council unanimously came to the conclusion that the proposal for 2014 was really shortchanging Caltrain, and thus the interests of Palo Alto and those the rest of us in North County. And so my question to you, though, is the board taking a role in talking about what's going to happen for 2016, or are you deferring that all to VTA, or any other thoughts that you might have on that?
Well, this is, I'm going to ask Ms. Mohan, who's got copies. Anticipating this conversation, I brought a copy of an op-ed I wrote for the Mercury News dated July 28th, 2000. And the lead paragraph reads, "To BART or not to BART, that is not the question. At least that's not the only question." And the argument I made back in the year 2000 when we were having this conversation at that particular time was that I thought my constituents, the district that I represented, were really quite enthusiastic about looking at county-wide solutions and regional solutions, but had a legitimate expectation that there would be some tangible, demonstrable benefits for the area that I represent and for the taxpayers who were going to be putting up at least 1/5 of the funding. In fact, by virtue of where the sales takes place, and I think you all know this, the 5th Supervisorial District that I represent in the North County ends up putting more than 1/5 of the actual dollars into the mix in terms of where the sales tax receipts come from. Historically, we have also put more than 1/5 of the yes votes up on the board because people here, as I say, are prepared to support regional transportation solutions. And again, I haven't had a chance to look at this issue because it hasn't been formally in front of us since I got back. But when I looked at it all those years ago, guess what? If you look where the commute trips are happening, up and down between San Mateo and Santa Clara County is a significant source of those commute trips. So for all those reasons, when I was approached by the leadership group this year, I raised the same issue early on that I think subsequently was raised by many of you, either formally or informally, and said, I think I could get behind such a measure if there is really some tangible and demonstrable benefit for and I'm not saying it has to be 20% or 23% if that's the sales tax. I'm just saying that at some point people are legitimately going to ask the question, what's in it for us? And there's nothing provincial or parochial about people asking that question. If they're being asked to put money on the table, they're going to want to hear a legitimate answer to that, even as they have been willing to pay for a BART system that probably most of them will not use. So I think looking for the silver lining in this conversation, the fact that ultimately the decision was to punt for 2 years gives us some time now, and now I have to take my own admonition, which is start the conversations early, gives us some time now to say to the folks at SVLG and others who are interested, let's start talking now about what it is that might be in the mix to benefit commuters who thus far have not seen a lot of benefit. And I would say to you, it would be helpful to me in my role working with those 7 or 8 different communities to hear from you what you think that should be. So if there are limited new transportation dollars coming, where should they go? Should they go to light rail? Should they go to Caltrain? Should they go to, I'll just say the phrase out loud, grade separation? But I give a little talk, Larry, that I don't think you've ever been subjected to, called Summidian's 13 Tips for Successful Advocacy. And one of the tips, tip number 5, which is you can't get what you want till you know what you want, which is the title of a song by Joe Jackson. And I think we can't get what we want until we know what we want. So the first thing I would say is, with this 2-year delay, let's make sure we know what we want so we can be advocates and so that we can pull together partners in the other smaller suburban North County communities who will not have identical desires, but will have similar desires, I think, in terms of what they hope to see from such a measure 2 years out.
And you'll be sending all those tips to each one of us.
The 13 tips? Well, we can certainly invite you the next time some group is obliged to hear me present. So, but actually, why don't I ask Ms. Mohan if she could, through the clerk, hand these out to you all, because when I pulled it out, Larry, I have to tell you, I was surprised. This is, sometimes your views change over time or circumstances. This could almost be written today in terms of my point of view about this particular issue and how I would hope we would approach the next measure.
Councilmember Scharf.
Thank you, and thank you very much for joining us, Senator Summidian, Supervisor Summidian. A couple questions. The first is, Supervisor Chavez wrote a memo regarding having a sub-regional process on RENA.
On the regional housing.
On the RENA housing allocation. Yeah. There's a lot of possible benefits to Palo Alto, but also a lot of risks. A lot of these things tend to be San Jose dominated. And I think some of the concerns would be that we might lose some control over the process. And I think we'd definitely like it to be more of a carrot type where you could trade and that kind of stuff. And I don't know if you're aware, but the Santa Clara County Cities Association has started working on this process as well for the next RENA allocation to try and come up with a sub-regional process that has very much a carrot which would help people where they could trade possibly, as opposed to being. And I don't know if you have a sense of where you're going at the county with that or the reaction to Supervisor Chavez's memo.
My recollection, and I don't want to give you a for sure because I just don't remember it this precisely, is that the conversation and the effort is pretty much focused on voluntary efforts. In other words, that there, for example, we've done some work, as council members know, with Stanford in terms of trying to provide a little flexibility for all parties involved. I think that where there are voluntary efforts where everybody sees something in it for their community. I mean, the simplest example is if you have a community with high-priced land and some money in the bank and a community that has low-priced land and no money in the bank, maybe the two of them should be talking so that you can put the housing on the low-priced land and use the funds from the community that has more resources than available land. Now, I do think that raises some questions about not wanting to congregate all of the affordable housing in a handful of communities. But I also think there are some obvious opportunities for collaboration. And so the thing I will go back and do, and I'll send it back through the mayor and through your manager, is I think that the word voluntary was explicitly part of the conversation. It certainly was in the tone, and we'll double check on that and get back to you.
All right, thank you very much. And the second thing was Oregon Expressway. How are we doing on getting that finished so that we have less traffic delays? Sorry to ask the question, but I'm sure everyone's interested.
Because he's the only one thinking about it.
It's been a pleasure to be with you tonight. I look forward to coming back again soon.
I told you it was
It's been an unmitigated disaster. The short version is there is a subcontractor who has failed to perform. And they have a liquidated damages clause. You could tell that this is a subject I've been asking about myself. They have a liquidated damages clause that probably is costing them $1,500, $1,600 a day and as they're probably 6 months behind schedule. So for them, it's probably a $300,000 hit. The good news is it really will be wrapped up in the next week and a half to 2 weeks. The striping that will be done, and this is a conversation that I've had with our roads and airport people, will be done, I think, from 7 p.m. to the wee hours of the morn in an effort to try and make sure that we're not disrupting commute traffic and primetime traffic any more than it already has been. You can be assured I've communicated to our roads and airports that the liquidated damages payments are of little solace to those of us who use that stretch on a regular basis, myself included. I do think we'll get a couple of different benefits, and I know our roads and airports folks have been in touch with the city's people. Number one, there'll be a dedicated left turn on green at a number of these intersections so that people aren't taking their lives in their hands every time they try and turn left onto Oregon Expressway. Number two, once that's done, it will also allow for improved synchronization. At least that's the phrase I use. There's some other traffic jargon phrase that is appropriate, but I think most folks just call it traffic synchronization in terms of moving the traffic flow along. So if you can just grit your teeth and bear it for another couple of weeks, I think we'll be in pretty good shape both on the safety front with the left turn lanes and also on the moving things along a little bit more expeditiously with less stop and start.
Thank you very much.
I think the constituency will be glad to hear that.
Yeah, no, it's just, you know, when you live, you know, that's the road I take to get from my home in the Duveneck area to my North County office at the county courthouse, and my vocabulary has expanded. I'll just let it go at that. So.
Well, I'm the last one, but I think I just wanted to do a tag on Councilmember Klein's comments about an initiative for 2016, and the fact that I know that San Francisco did mention at one time at one of the modernization meetings with Caltrain that they are looking to that. To maybe strategically consider subsidies actually for Caltrain as well. So I guess my interest would be to see how the County Board of Supervisors can line up and down the peninsula and bring some thinking about how to consider not just what was presented by leadership group this last time, but actually thinking about the survival of Caltrain long into the future, because they do not have rolling stock once they electrify. So they will have maybe one electric train, but the rest of it is all the old locomotion. And that does give me great concern. This is a supervisor-run kind of JPA and initiated, and so I just wanted to underscore that and see if there's a way that perhaps the county, you know, the three counties could start a conversation to time this into that, and then we could look at our own needs in Santa Clara as well. So,
fair enough. Just a reminder that putting a measure like this on the ballot can be done a couple of different ways. It can be done by the Board of Supervisors, but assuming or presuming that it's a special tax, meaning it's for a particular purpose, transportation, that requires 4 votes. And the other option is for the folks at VTA to put the measure on the ballot. And candidly, what happens is that if you've got a proponent like the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, they're looking to see who will be the most accommodating in terms of putting the measure on the ballot the way they would like the measure to be drafted. And we went through this back in 2000, which is why the op-ed was written in the first place. Leadership Group came with then Mayor Gonzalez from San Jose, had a proposal that frankly was a non-starter with the Board of Supervisors, had maybe 1 vote at best, and then we said, well, come back with something else, and the reaction at the time was, well, if you don't like it, why don't you come up with your own plan? The county's not really set up for that, but I sort of set up a little bootleg shop in my office and scrambled for about 6 weeks to do that. Came back with a plan that I thought dealt with both roads as well as transit, but only 3 of our board members were prepared to support that sort of alternate approach, and that meant then that the VTA was the other logical source of approval, and off they went to VTA, and we ended up with a package that in many respects I don't think served my district as well as it might have, but that was a venue where they were prepared to say yes to something similar to what had originally been proposed by Mayor Gonzalez, understandably San Jose centric, and the Silicon Valley Leadership Group at the time. So why don't I just a little too late for our meeting coming up on August 26th, but at the first meeting in September, I'll do a referral on this issue to start our bureaucratic wheels moving, to start assessing, to start having the conversation about really two things. What do we need, and sort of what are our priorities, and then what share, of the funding historically has come to our area. And again, I don't want to be too hard-nosed about this. I think people in our district really are great about taking a regional perspective, but they also have a reasonable expectation that they see some benefit in terms of their daily travels. So we'll put it on the first meeting in September, and we'll share it with all of you. And I don't know if all of you get it. I know how much mail you get because I used to get it. We've taken to just sending you occasionally letters that I've sent out on different topics with a thought this might interest you, sticker on it. And that seems to be kind of a low-tech, old-fashioned way of making sure, in addition to email, that you actually know what we're doing down at the county.
All right. Well, thank you very much for coming and joining us this year again. And
one other thing, and just a parting is, and again, this is something that will resonate, I think, with former supervisor, now Vice Mayor Niss. The county has more than 70 boards and commissions. And they require talented people to fill those slots. And if talented people don't step up, less talented people get placed in those positions. So, I have a district full of talented people, but they're not always aware of the opportunities at the county. I want to encourage anybody who might be interested to go to the boards and commissions part of my webpage at Supervisors Committee and take a look, see if there's a venue. It's everything from the Sister County Commission to mental health to roads and highway, just anything you can imagine. So we're looking for a few good men and women, and want to close with that shamelessly self-promotional pitch, if I can, Madam Mayor.
Nice job.
Thank you. Yay. All right. Good. Well, I'd be kidding if I said I wish I could stay to work with you on your agenda. So on that, thank you all very much.
Okay, we are back to returning to our agenda, and there are that I know of, agenda changes, additions, or deletions. And now we have city manager comments.
Okay, thank you, council members. Let's see, a number of things to report on this evening. An update related to the California Avenue streetscape. Our contractor is making good progress on the streetscape project with construction at about the halfway point. The water line replacement has been completed and the construction of streetscape improvements is in full swing. Our staff does appreciate our community's continued patience with the periodic street closures and other inconveniences. We continue to meet regularly with business owners in the area and are preparing a status report on the schedule and budget for dissemination in early September. Given some of the complexities associated with the water line replacement and other issues, however, we now expect construction to extend past the end of this calendar year and likely to not be completed till March of 2015. We will have more specific information from the project team to follow at the meeting, your meeting on September 8th. Another Mitchell
Jim,
Park Library.
Could you go back, repeat, what was that again?
Do you want me to go backwards, or do you just want to? The schedule that we are looking at for completing all of the work now, the staff informs me, is likely to extend past the end of the calendar year and into the, maybe not all done until March 2015. So working with the merchants and everybody, I'll be able to give you a more specific and detailed report on September 8th. As soon as I heard this, I wanted to give you this update. Mitchell Park Library and Community Center. Over the next few weeks, the library facilities are undergoing what's called a flush out, which helps prepare each building for occupancy by running the ventilation systems with maximum outside air. This is done after all the activities that might generate dust or smells are complete as part of the construction. And though it may seem as if not much is happening this week, that's on purpose given to prevent the introduction of dust or smells. This is done thoroughly to not only air out the building, but is required for the LEED certification that we are pursuing for the building. Getting closer and closer. The British invasion in the Mitchell Park Mitchell Park Library grand opening. The city will come together on Saturday, September 27th from 3:30 to 8 p.m. as we celebrate the 50th anniversary of the British invasion, of course, led by the Beatles, with a celebration and sneak peek look at the Mitchell Park Library and Community Center that will open later this fall. The community is invited to take a docent-led mini tour of the new center, join a mixer on the new basketball court. I think that's a mixer, not an actual basketball game. I think the only people to play on the court so far are Jeremy Lin and our very own Greg Scharf. And then we will enjoy a concert by the Sun Kings, a popular Bay Area Beatles cover band who will perform at the mini Candlestick Park. Look at this as a reunion of Candlestick since the last tour concert the Beatles gave was at Candlestick. They'll be coming back to Palo Alto. Most people have known it as the Palo Alto Little League Field. All of the events are open and free to the public, but tours and seating will be limited. Check out the city's website soon for all of the details on how to sign up. And of course, as many of you know, we know that the Cabana Hotel was the place for a real-life Beatlemania scene on August 31st, 1965, when 3,000 screaming fans, mostly females, blocked traffic along El Camino Real. They had traffic on El Camino Real back in 1965, just to get a glimpse of the Fab Four who were staying there following their concert at the Cow Palace in San Francisco. And mark your calendars and save the date for the official grand opening celebration at Mitchell Park Library and Community Center on Saturday, December 6, 2014. This event will kick off 5 weeks of special programs and events to include the entire community and highlight the best that Palo Alto has to offer. More details will follow in the coming months, but we hope to see everyone at this once-in-a-lifetime event. Emergency dry year water waste restrictions. The council adopted the emergency dry year water waste restrictions on August 4th, and staff is working on a compliance and enforcement plan to ensure a coordinated response to the new measures. Our staff is also maintaining a spreadsheet to track reports of water waste. As of today, the city has received and responded to approximately 32 reported incidents, and responses are education-based at this time, with notices left at reported properties and continued outreach about our water conservation rebates and services. However, staff recognizes the necessity of having a mechanism in place to address repeated violations, and we will return to council in early September for approval of additional enforcement authority for these newly adopted water restrictions. Now, Claudia, can you help me with the next item? Just in case you missed it, I think it's worthwhile to showcase the ingenuity of one of our staff people, but representing the attitude that many of our folks have on our staff. One of our employees, senior engineer Mike Navsiger of Public Works, came up with a new and innovative way to reuse groundwater that is removed during construction excavations involving basements and that is typically gone into storm drains. Mike, who oversees Public Works permitting for residential and commercial construction projects in Palo Alto, has also fielded many complaints from citizens over the years who see the water runoff from such projects and thought it wasteful, particularly in times of drought like today. So Mike developed a water station to reuse this water for street sweepers, fire trucks, and other city equipment, and within 2 days it already saved 6,000 gallons of water. In a piece of wonderful irony, a member of the community called Mike last week to complain about the wasting of water at the site of Mike's first water reuse station. Once Mike told him about the reuse project, the resident was really impressed. He told Mike that he'd already filled out a detailed complaint on KCBS's water waster website and had been contacted by 2 reporters. And the day after speaking with Mike, the resident called the reporters back and told them about Mike's innovative water system, and KPIX contacted him for their story. So we have a short clip from that newscast, and then congratulations to Mike for coming up with this great idea, and thanks to his responsiveness in the community. By him. Got a preview.
They've torn down one of those old Palo Alto homes to build a new big McMansion. But first they have to dig out a big basement. It's taking a whole lot of water out of the ground. Part of the underground water table is so prevalent here.
They need to pump that water out first in order to be able to dig the hole before it fills up.
The site takes the water out of that big hole. And where's all that water go? It's a lot of water before this construction site's through. 100,000 gallons of water maybe. Right now it's going down the drain. That's not good. Just recently though, they started putting it in trucks like that. And this. Trucks that use a lot of water that otherwise could be used to drink.
That's great. It's fabulous. Is that a rule? I mean, is that a city mandated policy?
As of this week, yes.
I have been trying to figure out ways to use this water for years.
Mike Nafzinger is with the city's Public Works Department. He's the man behind the plant, possibly one of the first in the country.
In the first 2 days of this station operation, it was over 6,000 gallons.
Here's how. Crews route some of the water to this station where street cleaners and fire trucks come to fill up. The users think it's a pretty good idea too. How big is that tank?
It's about 600 gallons.
So you're saving 600 gallons every time you fill
Yeah,
up?
every single time, and I could probably fill up 2, maybe 3 times a day.
This is a pilot program, but when other such construction is going to be done, the city will tell construction crews this.
They connect to the valve?
Is now the way we are helping to save water. In Palo Alto, Mike Sugarman, KPIX 5.
Thanks to Mike, and an acknowledgement about that. Okay. More on-the-spot responses and adaptations. We had a little traffic jam at the Palo school entrance. Today, over the last couple of weeks, staff has been working with Palo officials to prepare for today's start of school, and this morning staff was out in the field to monitor the Embarcadero, Palo Town and Country intersection. While the Palo driveway cleared during almost every signal cycle except for about a 5-minute peak, the big issue today was the left turn into Palo with delays and honking, and even a few people running a red light to get into school due to deficiencies with the equipment. So the city staff had to react quickly to fix the video detection system at the intersection and reset the traffic signal controller a couple of times. Kudos to Charlie Gallardo from our signal operations team for figuring out what was amiss, and thanks to Jaime Rodriguez for getting a new controller delivered and programmed this afternoon. Our staff will be back out in the field to monitor the intersection with new equipment tomorrow morning. And then lastly, the Twilight Concert Series will conclude Saturday, August 23rd with Teens on the Green, featuring local teen bands. And the 8 concert series also included performances from local favorites like blues musician A.J. Crawdaddy and Grammy Award-winning Mads Tolling Quartet. And that's all I have to report. Thank you.
And I did see that Gunn has a new entrance too. So is that expected to relieve anything that we know of when people are getting into? It's over on the veteran side. I don't see Jaime here. So, yeah. Well, good luck tomorrow for the first day of school. So, moving on to oral communications, we have 2 speakers. Our first speaker is Cybele Bouchan, and you can speak on any item that we do not have on the agenda tonight for 3 minutes. And our next speaker will be Mark Weiss.
So I'm going to mention the E word, the election, and once that's over, then the real business begins. And I learned that there is a joint meeting between the cities and supervisors Submittian's district, and whoever that representative is in 2014. I'm just encouraging, and whoever's the representative right now, whether it's, I don't know whether it's the mayor or Mr. Schaaf or whoever, to just keep looking at this unhoused situation, keep pushing and make sure that we have up and running in November 2012 a cold weather shelter. Thank you.
Mark Weiss? Wait. Yeah, sorry about that, Mark. You and I have been playing with your last name. Okay, Mark, welcome.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and Council. I have a set of 3 what I think of as interrelated items, and I'm not sure if in 2 minutes I can make this clear, but I will try. So I'm talking about public safety, and what I think is we need a dialogue about public safety. And one thing is there were recently reports in the paper about our 2011 Measure D ballot initiative that impacted the collective bargaining agreement of one of our public safety unions and binding arbitration, and a regional panel suggested there was something improprieties in how we did that. I thought that was significant. Also, I've been researching what was called the gun graffiti hate crime case, and I wrote to our chief, Dennis Burns, and I wrote a letter to Chris Kenrick of the Palo Weekly, and I'm trying to reach Mr. Burns' spokesman, Sergeant Zach Perrone, and the schools. But what my feeling is, this was based on a May of last spring, 2014 case, that the media and perhaps public safety sort of fanned the flames of racism and classism by sensationalizing something that was really serious, but not in the order of a hate crime. I'm a strong proponent of the First Amendment. I've talked on a lot of First Amendment issues in front of council and commissions. And then tying that into what we've seen in the papers recently about Ferguson, Missouri, and militarization of public safety in the United States. What I am for is more of a seamless transition from neighborhood preparedness to public safety. I've spoken on this as far back as 2009. I'd like to see more young people from Gun Pally and Castellea aspire for community service. I don't believe in outsourcing any of this. I don't believe in privatizing any of this. I think we can self-govern and we can self-police. And also in November of 2011, there was something about we outsourced to a private, very militarized group called American Guard Services. And at the time I wrote letters, at least to the Palo Weekly, saying all they did was take our existing crossing guards and make them work for less. Yet I at the time actually wanted the city attorney to invalidate the bidding to them and rebid it and have local people organized to protect our children on the way to school and safe routes to school. So I think we really do need a dialogue about public safety and what is the proper way that we can, Palo Altans can take care of ourselves. If we reach across the creek one direction or the other, that's a good thing. But I wouldn't want to pool our resources and privatize these things.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda is the consent calendar, and I have one speaker, and that is Herb Borak on item number 7. You'll have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mayor Shepard. I don't believe that you should be acting on this item this evening.
Can you move the mic over? Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think you should be acting on this item this evening, which is the FAA grant offer. Well, it's not an offer yet because it says that it's still in process. The environmental review that's needed has not been done. This project is not exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act. As I understand it, these grants usually come with the requirement to make an assurance to keep the airport continuing for a period of time dated from the time of the grant. And so that mere fact of extending that assurance further than our current assurance is itself a project under the California Environmental Quality Act. Also, if that's the case, then that fact should be stated in the staff report so you know what you're voting for. The resolution doesn't match the reason given by staff for the exemption from the California Environmental Quality Act. This staff report, as same as the previous one, on June 23, cites Regulation 15301. However, the resolution itself refers to both the Public Resources Code, Section 21080B8, and Regulation 15273A1 and 3. You have a letter from me at your places which indicates that the citations in the resolution don't apply to what's being done, because they apply to essentially raising the fees you charge to pay for the project, whereas the action you're being asked to take refers to the project itself. For all of these reasons, I think you should pull this from the consent calendar and direct staff to bring it back after appropriate environmental review and notice and correction of the draft resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Holman.
Just asking the city attorney if she could respond to the speaker.
We've reviewed the item and it's appropriately on consent. The findings are appropriate in the item and the environmental review will be done at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you. Then I am looking for a motion to accept the consent calendar. All right, we have a motion, and let's go ahead and vote on the consent calendar. And that motion carries with Councilmember Price and Burt absent. Our next item, as we move into our action items, is item number 8, which is the park dedication ordinance. And this is in 1981, the Russell Lee family donated 7.7 acres next to their quarry to the city of Palo Alto with a deed restriction that the property be used for conservation, including park and recreation purposes. This land extends past Foothill Park and came under city management in 1996 when the Lee family vacated their estate. Since 2005, a half-acre portion of the land is used as a native plant nursery by Actera, who holds a lease through 2015, which the city will continue to honor. The rest of the land is unused. Tonight we are here to follow up on 2 of the 5 directions Council made to staff in March. 1, to dedicate the 7.7 acres into permanent parkland for ordinance, and 2, to authorize the release of a letter of appreciation to the Lee family for the generous gift. In the staff report, we also have an update on the process of the other 3 directions to staff, which is outlining best uses and costs for the land, Park and Recreation Commission alternatives, and a timeline for opening to the public. Do we have a staff presentation on this?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Shepard and members of the City Council. Greg Betts, Director of Community Services. As Mayor Shepard said, the direction from March the 24th was 5 items to dedicate the 7.7 acres, to go to the Parks and Recreation Commission to vet ideas for possible uses of the property, and to return to the council in late fall after public outreach meetings at Foothills Park. There is an ad hoc commission committee that is working on possible ideas for the 7.7 acres in concert with the citywide parks, open space, trails, and recreation master planning process, and trying to take advantage of public interest and stakeholders from that process as well. After the commission has formulated some possible suggestions to return to City Council with those suggestions together with the cost estimates of what those various uses may include, and then to also come back to council with a timeline for opening the parcel for public use for whatever use is deemed most appropriate by City Council. I want to point out in the staff report on page 3, I made a technical error on the second reading of this ordinance, which is the first item before you, and I inadvertently put down September the 1st as the second reading. That of course is Labor Day, and so the second reading will actually be on September the 8th. We have been able to determine addresses for Lee family representatives, and I've worked with Mayor Shepherd to look at an initial draft of a thank you letter acknowledging the gift of the parcel to the city of Palo Alto. The staff has surveyed the property very extensively. We've actually hired an outside survey consultant to make sure that we got the metes and bounds of the property absolutely correct. And we've been able to identify all of the easements on the property, including utility easements, landscaping easements, and emergency egress and entrance. As you may know, this parcel is essentially the back door, if you will, to Foothills Park, and it's one of the quickest connections for fire responders from the Woodside-based California Fire Regiment to reach Foothills Park, as they did just a couple of months ago when there was a fire on Page Mill Road. The gateway is opened up to be able to come through that end of the park to save time rather than going all the way down to 280 and coming around that way. As the staff report points out, the parcel was first obtained by the city as part of a deed from the Lee family in 1981. In 1983, the family reserved an estate on the property with right of access to the city of Palo Alto, or excuse me, the right of access was sold to American Title. In 1985, permanent easements were granted by the City Council for emergency egress, utilities, and a landscape easement, as denoted on the maps in your staff report. And then in 1985 to 96, the property was held by American Title until 1996. Then a year-to-year lease was issued for the continued use of the property by Mr. Arriaga for construction on his home and storage of materials. In 2005, the lease was terminated, and since that time, staff has used part of the property in a 5-year lease with Actera for the operation of a native plant nursery. That lease was renewed by mutual consent in 2010 and comes up for renewal in 2015. Staff is available to answer questions on the proposal tonight, which is to dedicate the 7.7 acres respecting the lease with Actera and the current easements, and to authorize the mayor to finalize the letter to the Lee family.
Thank you. I have 2 speakers on this item, so I'll take that up now. Our first speaker is Craig Holland, J. Craig Holland. You will have 3 minutes, and followed by Herb Barak.
Thank you, Council, for letting me speak. I have a brief comment. I think this should be approved easily because it was the wishes of the person who donated the property. I mean, it shouldn't be any more complicated than that. Obviously, it got much more complicated than that. Horse trading and backroom dealing and all kinds of stuff, which have provided an important insight into the activity of the council, the incumbents, which I would hope this city recognizes and takes into account on Election Day. Thank you very much.
And Herb Barak.
Thank you. The staff report and the ordinance refer to the easements from, I guess it was 1985, when control of the property was with a private party, which was had been retained until, I guess, 1996. And the city got some rights through those easements for that period of time because we did not control the property at that time. And in exchange, we gave some easements to the private party. However, now that it's in our both ownership and control, it seems to me that we don't need the easements that we received for emergency fire access because it's our property. And so I was wondering, just what it means to have such an easement placed on that property now that it's ours. We can use the property for conservation purposes, just like any other property, any other dedicated parkland, and it's different now that somebody else doesn't have control over that right. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to return this to City Council. I can look for a motion right now, and I can just read out the motion if you'd like me to. Move adoption of a park dedication ordinance reserving 7.7 acres for park recreation or conservation purposes, and authorize the mayor to finalize and sign the attached letter of thanks to the Lee family for the gift of the parcel to the city. I was going to say that this is the motion that's on the. Okay, so we've got a. Does somebody want to first it, or?
I'll first it.
I saw Karen over there. I think that was her memo. Why don't I go ahead and let Karen have it? I'm sorry, Councilmember Holman. And Councilmember Holman, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, please. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. And, well, this has been a long time coming, and, we could bemoan that it's been a long time coming or celebrate that it's here. And I think where we are is to celebrate that this is happening. It's 7.7 acres, and, as they say, they're not making any more land. So it's really a landmark time that we have in front of us now that we are dedicating the 7.7 acres and highly appropriate. I have one question, and maybe it's for Mr. Betts. It might be for City Attorney. Is the staff report mentions there are some fences that need to be moved. Since this is going to be dedicated parkland, and we're happy about that. The fences that are moved, will the design of those fences need to go to Parks and Rec and be a collaboration with Mr. Arriaga or other adjacent property owners, or what will be the situation with that?
Thank you, Councilmember Holman. There's 4 different areas where the fences are off the property line by between 8 feet and 12 feet. Because of either improper surveying or what have you. As I mentioned, by contracting this out, we have real accurate lines now. When council makes their motion tonight, staff has already prepared a letter to Mr. Arriaga. We've spoken with the caretaker about moving these fences. The fences are chain link fences that are covered with low visibility black vinyl plastic, and I assume will be replaced in kind.
Does the city have any allowance for getting the new fences designed in a more appropriate fashion, since they will be abutting, I presume, city parkland?
I'll look into that. I'm not exactly sure what the process is, but I'll look to our colleagues in planning for advice on that. Typically, the city does not put up lands around its parks or open space. Usually it's the neighbors for privacy. And in this case, those fences were put up by the neighbors at their own expense, and the replacement will be at the neighbors' expense as well. But if we can give them direction on something more appropriate, we will.
Maybe City Attorney might have a comment on if we have any purview or ability.
I don't really. I think the general rule is if the fence is on the neighbor's property, they have leeway to select the fencing within our rules, and I don't know that we have any specific rules, so we'll have to look at that.
Okay. So maybe just encourage staff to work with the neighbors to construct appropriately designed fences for open space adjacencies. Thank you for that.
Councilmember Scharf, do you want to speak to your second?
Sure. I am definitely with Councilmember Holman. We should celebrate this. It's not every day we get to dedicate an extra 7.7 acres of parkland, so I'm really pleased. I did want to get a little clarification of when you think we could get this open to the public. So I looked at the timeline. Are we thinking is going to be a lot of construction, to get it ready, or is it winter 2015 it's supposed to come back? In terms of a plan, how long do you think it'll take to actually get it open to the public?
Thank you, Councilmember Scharf. There's two questions. One is there is a large entrance gate that's used by staff and volunteers of the Acterra Nursery to walk into the site to access the native plant nursery. That fence also serves as a barrier for deer browsing at the nursery. The Acterra will need to construct a safety fence around their property to be able to keep the deer out. So that's one decision point on how long it'll take to fence off that half acre for the protection of the native plant nursery. The second is just based on what kind of recommendations come back from the Parks and Recreation Commission to the Council on uses of the parcel. Take, for example, if the Commission should come back and say, we feel that the parcel might best serve as a location for an artist in residence and move the eco home from where it is currently at Rinconada Park onto the parcel there. Very little would be needed in terms of utilities to be able to support that kind of function. If someone were to say that we want to have a sports field, that would require irrigation on that parcel. There is no piping for irrigation, and we'd probably have to go through the CIP process to dedicate an irrigation CIP for approximately about $500,000 to be able to support an elaborate landscaping plan. So there's kind of a spectrum of different times, but clearly the staff understands the importance of getting back to council with a timeline and a plan as quickly as possible. And we've already consulted with the consultants from MIG about incorporating ideas into their public outreach process.
So just so I understand the timeline, this comes as a second reading on September 8th, and the fall, the Parks and Rec Commission is going to meet and discuss and give a report on best uses. Are they going to give a final report at that time, or is that when they start the process?
That's when they hope to have their outreach at Foothills Park with interested park users and stakeholders, and then make their recommendations hopefully by the first of the year.
Okay, so the first of the year, and then you come back the winter, which is shortly thereafter. And that's when you come back to council with those recommendations.
That is correct.
Got it. Well, thank you very much for your efforts on this.
Vice Mayor Niss.
So I'm equally enthusiastic about dedicating any amount of land to park. The one thing I would suggest, though, and I'm looking at you, Greg, as I say this, is if anyone hasn't been up there lately, have you all been up there recently? It does not look like a piece of pristine parkland. It currently is rather like a dust bowl. There are two groups that are located on there. Acterra is one, and the other one is...
There's nothing else.
There was something else that was there, whatever it was. So it will... I think, first of all, we need to talk to Acterra because they have been there. I don't remember how long. Do you recall how long they've been there?
Since 2005, so 9 years now.
Yeah. So as it goes on 10 years, I think they have felt that that's, an important place for them to have that location. So I want to make sure that they're included in it at the same time. But also, it probably would be a great idea, Greg, if you can arrange for some tours for Parks and Rec to go and take a look at that piece of land before decisions are made later on in the fall about what we might do with it. The access is not, I didn't think, very easy. Mayor Shepherd and I spent some time up there not too long ago. And we need to think carefully about the best way we can use this, have people look at it so that we're realistic in what our expectations are, and then celebrate the fact that we do have another almost 8 acres of land, which is always reason for celebration. Thanks.
Councilmember Schmidt.
Yeah, I want to thank staff for the prompt return to the council with this exciting evening to be able to dedicate 7.7 acres of parkland. It's taken some time to arrive at this point, but it is an important step. I'd like to give a little note of thanks to Herb Borak, who the night this was first discussed in closed session actually produced a number of very detailed and important maps from the county assessor's office that were very helpful in thinking through this. We have a detailed map in front of us of the surveyor's result, and I have a couple questions on that. Do you have a copy handy? Yeah.
There's one that's been colored.
Yeah, now on the northern border of the piece of property, there's a blue stretch. It probably accounts for 15 to 20% of the 7.7 acres. And that says that it is exclusive easement for landscaping. Now, I think that was referred to by one of the commenters, that this was done, easement granted before the city had actually use of the property. So is the city legally responsible for that easement? Are we voting tonight confirming an easement which might have some questions attached? Maybe a question for the city attorney.
So at the time the easement was granted, the city did have fee title to the land, but not use and access of the land. That was reserved as part of this estate, which was transferred during the period of its reservation. The easement is a permanent easement. It's been recorded, and it is not subject to the city's unilateral change at this point. So the dedication is laying on top of that easement, but we are required, absent some other decision by the easement holder, to honor the easement.
Now the map does indicate a line drawn on the south side of that easement, and is noted it's an 8.5-foot chain link fence on city property. Now, is that part of what we are agreeing to? I mean, this sounds the opposite of what the city attorney said earlier, that we had nothing to do with fences outside of city property, but this is inside city property. So are we agreeing to an 8.5-foot chain link fence?
So just to clarify, fences that might be outside city property are not in city ownership, but there may be rules that apply to fencing. I don't know what they are off the top of my head, so staff
But this
will
one
need to
is
look at that.
inside city property.
I don't know whether it's on the line of the easement, or and perhaps real estate can tell us whether there is anything in the easement that bears on the fencing.
Hamid tells me it's on the easement line inside the city property.
And I should also point out, unfortunately, this map is not a topographical map that would show that the area in blue is quite steep. It basically goes up the hill like in, I'm not exactly sure what the slope is, but it's more than 25%. So to a great extent, its use is a little bit limited because of its steep terrain.
I understand. But the 1985 agreement said that that fence was subject to site and design review. Now, is that still subject to site and design review, or by voting this map are we accepting an 8.5-foot chain link fence.
We can certainly look at the fencing issue. Nothing that you do tonight to dedicate the land will disadvantage the city in any respect in wanting to have more authority over the fence and perhaps talk about a replacement for the fence.
Okay, as long as that is clear.
Yeah.
Now, I guess one of the things that the Parks and Rec Commission is doing is looking at alternatives. And they say they're going to talk to stakeholders. Now, one of the stakeholders identified is Actera and the neighbors, but the biggest stakeholder is the public. Now, before the Parks and Rec Commission make their determination, will that parkland be open for a day, a weekend, so the public can actually see what the beauties of the park and have some input to the process?
Yes, it will.
Good. I will then enthusiastically support the motion in front of us and look forward to early in 2015 having this returned to council.
I wanted to just ask a follow-up question on the chain link fence. I know that some of the material I've read, there was concern because I guess Arriaga has the portion of the dig of the quarry where he's got the big holes where they would bring out the rocks, and there was safety issues regarding and so this chain link fence went up. Is there any other concern that we have? Does it, if people find their way onto his property, do we have concerns at all? There's no danger anymore, right?
No, there's
Okay.
not.
That's what I was trying to get at. So, and this is not the portion of the fence that you wanted to have removed and relocated?
No, it's not. It's actually on the opposite side of the property near the caretaker's home where the fence lines are off.
Okay. Well, thank you. And I, too, am enthusiastic about this. I think this is exciting, and it has been on a long journey to get to tonight. So let's go ahead and vote. And that passes unanimously with Burt and Price absent. All right. Our next item tonight is the parking garage technology implementation. In February, Council gave staff specific direction to work on and issue requests for proposals on parking strategies to increase parking options and alternatives for commuters to jobs in our downtown districts as part of a multi-pronged approach to address the overflow parking in the residential neighborhoods. Last week, we approved the RFP study for the design of satellite parking and the contract for development of a transit management association. Tonight, we are addressing expanding garage occupancy with better permit controls, parking innovations, and generally rethinking the downtown parking experience. In September, Council will consider locations for a new downtown parking garage. After the staff report on parking garage technologies and public comment, I will return to Council for questions, comments, and action. And I think that you will be also giving us a motion at the end of your presentation so that we can use that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Shepherd, council members. Hillary Gittleman, the planning director. I'm joined by Jessica Sullivan, our parking manager. We're here tonight to talk about parking garage technologies. Jessica has a presentation for you. Then we're interested in hearing comments and questions from the public and from the council, and that we would love the opportunity to respond to those after the public comment period. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor Shepherd, Vice Mayor Niss, and honorable members of council. So tonight, one of the things we wanted to do was start off with a little bit of discussion to provide some context to the challenge that we want to help solve with parking technology. So here on the screen, you'll see some familiar looking programs. I mean, this is really the kind of crux of our parking management strategy, which these sort of three tracks. We called it the three-legged stool. Parking management, the idea of transportation demand reduction, and then parking supply measures. So as most of you know, we are making a lot of progress on many of these initiatives. Parking management strategies are really looking at who gets to park where and for how long and for what cost. And so the downtown RPP program that we'll be bringing to council in November is part of that strategy. We'll talk a little bit more today about permit policy review and pricing. Then transportation demand reduction is really our strategies that are focused on how to get people out of their cars and giving them other viable options to get downtown without the use of a car. We have our Transportation Management Association that's kicking off this month, as well as our pilot with Zipcar, and our employee commute programs have been ongoing, as well as our shuttle programs. And then parking supply measures. So these are really the strategies we have that are looking at how do we manage our existing parking supply, how do we build new supply, and more effectively utilize what we have. So tonight we're really looking at a number of strategies that are in various parts of this sort of big picture discussion. Permit policy review is one of those things. We'll be talking tonight a little bit about some of the recommendations that have been given to us and that we're moving forward with around the management of our permit policies. The idea of beginning to start using pricing as an incentive to help manage who parks where. And then under the parking supply category, we have really the crux of some of the issues we're going to be talking about tonight. The improved branding of our garages, and then parking guidance systems to help people find parking spots faster and more efficiently, and then revenue access controls to give them the infrastructure to begin to pay for parking beyond the free time limit that we currently have. So that's sort of just quick overview of the fact that we really do see this as an integrated strategy. This is not a one program's not going to fix this problem. We really want to seriously consider all of these initiatives and move them forward. On a sort of fun note, we also have a little technology pilot program that's happening right now in front of City Hall. We wanted to give you a quick snapshot of what that looks like. You can see the Google Maps image on the slide. This is it's a sensor technology. It's not super complex. Basically, there's little puck sensors within the parking spots that provide occupancy information to a local sort of router that then provides the information to a server and creates this dashboard that you can see. But what it's telling us is that out of those 6 parking spots right there in front of City Hall, 2 of them are empty and 4 of them are filled. And then it also tells us by spot how long they've all been occupied for and what the average length of time of occupancy is. So for parking spot number 3 right there, we can see that the average length of time that somebody has parked in that spot. So this is the kind of information we are excited about getting for many of our parking spots, both on street and off street. And again, this is a sort of just a pilot project, but we wanted to see what the possibilities were. So again, to continue to provide some context to the discussion, last week when we discussed satellite parking, we wanted to kind of come back with a little bit more information about the magnitude of the challenge that we have. So we wanted to give you some information that we have that we've put together about how we're looking at the parking demand in the downtown areas, and ultimately how we start to chip away at that problem and address it. So on the left here, what you see is parking occupancy studies that we do seasonally, and this is occupancy data in the downtown area from a sort of a typical day in April. If you look at the streets that are lined with red, that means that basically you have occupancy levels that are 86% or higher. So essentially fully parked. Very, very difficult to find any parking spots there. There's a lot of red area in that day, and that's a typical noontime occupancy pattern. And then on the right, you're going to look at the same day except at midnight. And so this is obviously a sort of murky science, but what we wanted to do was actually subtract the total number of cars on the street at midnight from the total number that we had on the street at noon, as a way to sort of come up with not really a number of employees that are parking in the neighborhoods, but really as a sort of quasi-demand calculation recognizing that this is an approximation and it is really just one day in time. So we did that exercise and came up with 1,851 cars as the demand number for that particular day. Now, if you look at the number of total spots on the street, in the downtown area, that entire map, we have about 6,500. And then if you take out the blue area, which is the commercial core, that's about 1,000, which means we've got, close to 5,500 total spots within the residential areas. So then we sort of start to take a look at that number and chip away at it based upon the strategies that we've discussed this evening and at other council meetings. So if we look at that employee demand number, understanding that it's not a static number, but it is a place to start. Then we look at the programs that we've got today. We look at the programs we can have in place by the time RPP is implemented in early next year. And then we look at programs that we can have in the future, which really for us includes new garages, as well as the other measures. So to sort of just quickly walk you through this, today we have our employee demand, and then really the only program that we have on top of that to sort of create additional supply is the Lot R Valet Assist program, which allows us to park an additional 42 cars in the Lot R garage. So total is still 42, and then we still have a huge number of people parking in the neighborhoods. When RPP is implemented, we can look at the potential for satellite parking to be maybe not quite implemented yet, but being very close to being implemented. And then the additional garages also have the valet program opportunities. So additional cars there. With our technology selections, we hope that we can increase the utilization of the garages, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then also the idea that with the RPP program, we can eliminate the Caltrain parker or the Stanford parker that would not be able to purchase a permit as part of the RPP program. We don't know the numbers for those parkers yet, so this is obviously an approximation, but we wanted to put some assumption in there. And then we can look at the future scenario, which includes all of the above, but then subtracting out valet, we won't want to do the valet program forever. Because it is an expensive program. We want to eventually build new garages. So the future scenario has us with new garages, and then also transportation demand management strategies, helping us reduce the total demand for parking. And then that brings us to a total of 966 spots. Again, a very rough science, but what we're trying to do here is really basically reduce the total demand for the parking by about 50%. Over the next few years. And if you look at that, what does that mean? Well, 966 employees that may still need to park in the neighborhood is about 18% of the total spots on the streets, and about half of what we have now. So again, that's just some context to kind of look at the challenge that we're talking about tonight. As part of this technology investigation, we engaged the parking committee to kind of discuss at a high level what some of the parking challenges are in Palo Alto, specifically the downtown. So a lot of these challenges are not unfamiliar to all of you. Underutilization of the garages was cited as an issue. That is something we have been working to address in recent months. We have seen actually a higher utilization than we usually do. Over parking in the neighborhoods, non-transferability of permits came up as a big item, and that is something that the technology we'll talk about tonight also will be able to address. The overall lack of data about who was in the garages and when they were in them, and again, this goes back to the technology we have in the garages to help us determine that information. Lack of centralized parking information, and this applied not only to the parking website, but also when a visitor comes to downtown, how do they perceive the parking, how do they find it, make it as easy as possible. The gaming of the color zone, this came up in a number of places, but people more or less move their cars between the color zones now. And then the lack of parking options for hourly workers. So out of that sort of challenge discussion, we developed 3 high-level goals that we hope to sort of address with technology and related policy decisions. So the first is to improve parking controls, use the right space for the right use. And that really means prioritizing residential parking for residents and commercial parking for downtown workers and customers. Make parking easier, so provide information to help us do that. And then develop solutions that really maintain the kind of charming downtown feel that we all love about Palo Alto. So now we want to sort of go to the recommendations that we've developed working with our consultants, and then explain exactly what we're already doing and then what we're asking specifically for council direction on. So everything in blue, and I'll explain this as I go through it, we're already sort of doing. Everything in black we're going to be looking at doing very shortly, but we want to sort of get some of these other options done first. And then everything in red is what we're requesting council direction on tonight. So the first item is improved branding and standardized sign installation for the downtown garages. This came up as it really was the number 1 recommendation of helping people find the garages quicker and easier and more efficiently, so they don't have to drive around the block looking for parking, and just getting a better sense of where our parking actually is. Enhance the city parking website. So again, this goes back to providing new businesses and existing businesses more consolidated, clearer parking information as part of the city's website. And we are actually doing this right now through an RFP that will be going out for online permit sales for the residential permit parking program. Number 1, we are currently finishing an RFP that we're planning to send out in late August or early September to look at new signage and branding for the garages downtown. Development of a downtown parking app. So this came up as another recommendation that we were excited about, but we wanted to get data that would feed the app before developing the app. So one of the most useful things we've heard is that people would really like an app to be able to find location of available parking spaces. If we don't have the technology implemented to do that, the app might be nice, but it might need to wait until we actually have the technology. Development of online permit sales is recommendation number 4. This one we are also looking at doing. We want to sell all the permits for the RPP program online so that it's not necessary to come to City Hall and purchase them. And as part of that solicitation, we would also look at seeing what it would take to sell all of our permit sales in that manner. Revision of parking time limits and then expansion of permit pricing options. Again, we were interested in pursuing these options, and we can talk a little bit more about that, but we wanted to wait until we had the technology infrastructure in place so that we could get the data we need to make appropriate decisions about those 2 pieces. Elimination of the downtown color zone, again, because people are sort of gaming the system, moving their cars around between zones. Again, this is something we want to consider, but we would like to have the occupancy data that shows us how long people really are parking in those spaces and how long do they need to be there. Introduction of off-street paid parking options. So this is the revenue and access control infrastructure, and this is something that we do want council direction on this evening. Enhancement of parking enforcement. The parking enforcement that we currently have at our downtown garages uses outdated technology, and one of the recommendations was that we look at streamlining that with license plate recognition enforcement. And we will be moving forward with that requirement as part of an RFP for contract enforcement for the residential permit parking program. And then the last piece is actually really part of recommendation number 1, and we would like council direction on this piece as well. The parking guidance system component of signage and wayfinding. So parking guidance systems provide real-time occupancy data to signage, which helps direct motorists to find available spots. And we would like input on the timing of that solicitation in the context of all of these other things that we're doing. So a little bit more about the parking guidance systems in particular. As you can see, these are some examples here, but basically there's a few different technologies that can be specified to perform this work. The simplest is using loop detectors that are installed within a garage, and as a car drives over the loop, it adds a car, and as it drives the other way, it will subtract a car. So that information can be provided to a server that has software, and it can distribute information to signs like the ones that you see here. These signs for Palo Alto, we would want to have, say, things like permit parking and hourly parking, so that parkers could understand where those particular types of parking were. The second component of the solicitation that we want to discuss this evening is the revenue and access control component. So revenue and access controls are going to come in a number of different forms, many of which you may be familiar with. Revenue and access controls allow you to timestamp a vehicle. So this starts to tell us, when do people get to the garage, when are they leaving. It can also provide data to parking guidance system technology, so it actually does two things at once. And there's a number of different ways that this can be done. They're discussed at length in the technology report that is attached to the staff report, but as a quick overview, a few different types of equipment. The most familiar one is probably gates. So when you drive through the garage, you get a timestamp on your the permit that you pull from the gate machine, and then you have the option of paying when you exit the garage or at a pay station within the garage. Because there was some discussion within the stakeholder group that gates might be a deterrent to downtown businesses, we did want to look at opportunities for gateless equipment. So that's where the discussion for LPR, or license plate recognition equipment, was had. This is fairly new technology, and there are some challenges with it. But it does give us the option of actually being able to drive a car into the garage with no gate, still being able to get that timestamp, and being able to pay either through a pay station or by actually getting an invoice in the mail like you would crossing the Golden Gate Bridge. And then another option is just to simply have standalone meters at every parking spot. So there's a number of different ways to achieve these goals. And our thought is that rather than specify which we really wanted, we would like to work with consultants to do that, to figure out which strategy best supports our goals for our garages in downtown. So these are all the things we want to consider next. I've kind of discussed most of these already, but the other one is, of course, we do want to look at on-street paid parking solutions in addition. The scope of the report was mostly the garages and lots, so our off-street facilities. But as part of an integrated approach, we do want to look at on-street paid parking as well. So this evening, we would like to ask your guidance for really one of two motions. Either to have us move forward as soon as possible with an RFP for the parking guidance system technology, and then following that as soon as we can with the access and revenue control technology proposal, recognizing that the access and revenue discussion might be a little more involved, or direct us to essentially send out a solicitation for an integrated system that combines both of those technologies. There can be some redundancy in the technology. As you may understand, the parking guidance system technology can also be essentially afforded by the implementation of some of the access and revenue control equipment too. So the challenge is that if we want to do them together, it will take us a few months longer to send out the solicitation. So that's the reason for our ask tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have one speaker on this item, so I'm going to go ahead straight to the speaker, and that is Eric Rosenblum. You will have 3 minutes.
Thank you, and I want to thank staff for preparing what looks like a great slate of parking improvements. So Jessica, thank you. Jaime, thank you. This looks awesome. First, Eric Rosenblum. I'm a resident of downtown North. Again, thanks everyone for the help. Just a couple of quick thoughts. The whole slate looks pretty encouraging. A couple pieces I wanted to emphasize. I'm really heartened to see that infrastructure for payments is going to be considered and installed. I hope this is widely deployed, not just in select garages, but I think almost everywhere that there is in the downtown area, that there would be the option to pay for longer periods of parking. For every person that says, I'll never come downtown to shop or eat again if I have to pay a cent for parking, I think there's always, studies have shown that there's always another person who will come downtown specifically because there's now parking, and is willing to pay the small price to be able to get into a parking space more conveniently. And frankly, my guess is that downtown merchants, retailers, restaurants would welcome people that are willing to pay somewhat a small price for parking to enjoy their services versus the people who really just want free parking. The second is just thoughtfulness about different kinds of parkers. And this is something I don't actually have data on, but my suspicion is that downtown Palo Alto is not a really easy place to run a retail or service business. Rents are very high. We don't actually have more people trolling around downtown versus other downtown areas, but our rents are considerably higher than many of our neighboring communities. So my guess is that the margins are not necessarily astronomical. And so if you're running a business, I assume that getting me to pay for a waiter puts additional burden on the business versus if I'm an employer downtown, like a SurveyMonkey or Palantir or Amazon, where there's additional cachet to being located in downtown Palo Alto. So my ask here, and I apologize for saying this somewhat incoherently, is to think about the different types of employees that are parking downtown. And you already referred to residents parking in residential areas, employees parking in employee areas, and I fully endorse that. But just to segment between the employees, I think it's putting additional burden on our downtown merchants, I think is unwise. But certainly some of our downtown employers need to provide adequate parking for all their employees. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Say Ready. You will have 3 minutes. I'm sorry, C Ready.
Thank you. My real name is Salem Reddy. That is also not real. My name is Prabhakar, but we'll leave it at C. Thank you. So I've talked randomly with some business owners as well as the managers at both downtown areas, the old downtown California Street, and as well as downtown areas. So I think one thing that they tell me is that the employees that work there have to go up or down every 2 hours to move their cars, and that's ridiculous. I think we need to provide a way for them to park their car, work 6-7 hours, and go home. I think in all our planning we need to consider that. It's just hard to manage a business where your employees have to go 2 hours and relook at their car and worry about it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and return to council. Vice Mayor Niss, you have a question.
This is such a hot issue. One of my first questions would be, where are all our constituents who have been so anxious to have this come forward? So I'm rather surprised to not see them here tonight. So let's hope they're watching or listening at home. So it sounds to me, though, looking at you, Jessica, that this is really all about time. It's about our timing. It's about being able to quantify the amount of time somebody is in the downtown. Everything we're discussing tonight really is about time. And frankly, and I think it's about time we did something about this. So as I look at this, and I'll try to keep this as a question, but the chances are when I get a chance, I'd move number 1, because I can't think of any reason why we wouldn't move forward as quickly as we can, given the demand that we have and the growth that we still anticipate. So am I missing something here, Jessica, aside from the fact that you did a terrific presentation? Thank you. And I have wondered forever why we didn't use sensors in this, a valley of electronics delight. Why are we not putting into place those exact things that probably most of these gadgets are produced here in the valley, and probably more apps are produced here than almost anywhere else in the world?
I mean, so I think one of our concerns was being mindful that, this stuff does cost a lot of money. If we implement parking guidance systems as soon as possible, let's say we did it with loops, which is a fairly inexpensive way to do what we want it to do, And then, 6 months later, we decide we want to go forward with revenue and access controls, and we put gates in the garages. Basically, the loop technology has to it's redundant. It gets ripped out. And that's just an example. I don't know what technology we would end up using. But there is a value in having the systems considered from an integrated perspective.
Give us an idea of what loop technology would cost, though, just so we can be factoring this in.
I think we had assumed in the staff report, I think we said it was just under $500,000, and then the $1.5 million for the revenue and access control equipment. So it's an investment.
I feel it's an investment we really need to make in our city. Beyond that, and I hear what you're saying, if we put one in and then we decide the next one is even better, and I'm gathering the gate system would be more likely to give us an indication of how many spaces are available, or can we do that with the loop technology just as well?
The loop technology does give you the information you need for parking guidance. It doesn't allow you to pay for parking and start to do that piece of it, but it gives you the information on how many spots are available at a given garage.
So looking at the illustrations you had for San Jose, for example, or maybe Haverhill in Massachusetts, you're looking at, I can look at that sign and I can tell precisely how many spaces are left. I may not be able to know what floor they're on, or might I know what floor they're on?
It is possible to know what floor they're on. I mean, you basically install a loop everywhere you want it to count, and then it can add and subtract. So obviously the more you have, the more expensive it becomes. But yeah, Jib says you get a busier sign, which is a good point. And a lot of times having it for multiple floors is useful when you've got garages that are multi-directional and you can go left or right. Our garages, you just keep going up, really. So
because there's really no question about whether or not this is an issue, and I don't think there's really any question about whether we'd go forward with the websites or with any of the kinds of things that you showed. If you can just bring them up again, toggle back and forth between between those two. So you're really looking for guidance more than anything tonight on the parking guidance system, which we're discussing, and the off-street paid parking options.
That's correct.
So the one I've been asking about is the parking guidance system. That would be the one that wouldn't be, it doesn't seem as difficult to me to put into place.
Yes.
The off-street paid parking options become more complicated, I think.
Yes.
So that's probably your more problematic area to be involved in. So let me let you go to others that I know will have equal number of questions, but I think I've indicated I'll probably be on recommendation number 1.
Councilmember Scharf.
Thank you. Couple questions. When we're talking about introducing off-street paid parking options, what we're talking about, I guess, is different pricing for it's different pricing for the permits. Is that what we're talking about, or what are we?
It's really talking about the infrastructure to allow people to pay for parking. It's really about the hourly parker is what it is. So it allows you to pay for parking past the 2 or 3 hours that you can park for free.
So I'm just trying to understand this from a practical point of view. So I drive downtown, I go to one of our flat lots. Off-street paid parking options could be meters. We're not talking about a garage. What else they could be a little machine that you go there and you put right? And like Redwood City. And you have ones where you have to put little paper in your dashboard and ones where you don't have to put it in your dashboard, right? So it doesn't seem that complicated. Why is it that complicated? I mean,
well, it also includes garages. It's not just
so I mean, that's why I guess I'm trying to get to, and that's why I'm being so a little incoherent here. I'm trying to get to, it seems to me that there's difference between parking in the lots. We have different paid parking options, which seems relatively simple, relatively easy. I would prefer you go to the pay machine, and I just put my credit card in, I just punch in which space I'm in, and I don't have to do anything more, and I walk away. That, to me, seems the easiest. So one of the things I wanted to emphasize was ease of use for the public. Some of the stuff is really complicated, and I don't particularly like the pay by phone other people do when you come to a meter. I don't particularly like the meters because they're more difficult. Sometimes they're broken and all sorts of things. So I guess I'm looking for ease of use, and I think we could I don't see why we can't do the lots quicker than we can do the garages no matter what. And I'm not convinced we can't do the garages quickly as well, but is there any reason why we couldn't say, go ahead and start implementing this in the lots now? And why not break it up like that between the lots and the garages?
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Scharf. I think you're demonstrating some of the reasons that we're coming to council with this timing question. I think Jessica's outlined there are a variety of different ways to do the revenue and access controls. That's true whether you're in the lots or in the garages. And I think we want to land on one technique so that our lots and garages are the same. So someone who's used to parking in one and goes to the other isn't all confused. And we want to get them so they all talk to each other. And so our question for council tonight really is, do you want us to proceed directly with the parking guidance systems? Because that's simple. You go, as Vice Mayor Nis indicated, and then let the revenue and access controls lag behind because there's some complexity here in deciding which strategy to implement. Knowing that then you may have to rip out some of the technology you've installed for parking guidance systems and replace it. Or should we hold our horses on the parking guidance system, make some of these decisions about which technologies we want to use for revenue and access controls, and then implement them as an integrated whole?
Yeah, and if I might add, Councilmember Scharf and the rest of the council, I've been going back and forth between these two myself all day. I mean, I was one, why don't we just do this, get going, and not. So I asked Hillary and the staff what the time differential they really thought was, which would be assuming that we can, have a meaningful discussion about the alternatives, but not spend forever on that, and then move to the actual design and implementation of this integrated system of revenue control technology along with the access. And I think you guys say you really feel it's about 6 months. Was that accurate?
We said 3 months in the staff report, realistically 3 to 6 months.
Yeah, so I think, so you're talking about to do option 2 would delay in one sense, the guidance system and the revenue control technology moving forward by about 6 months.
So if we go with option 2, when would that be implemented? When would that be online?
Our thought was that the parking guidance system, if we can get the wayfinding, the first recommendation there, so a branding program, standardized sign design, we're talking about designs and placement that will go through the ARB process and all the like. If we can get that moving at a good clip and integrate parking guidance system with that, our hope is that we would be implementing it concurrently with RPP at the beginning part of next year. If we decide that what we'd like to do is be more conservative and cautious in terms of our financial resources, and we want to integrate it with the revenue and access controls, it would take a little longer than that.
Well, at some point we're going to want to integrate it, right? So the question is between option 1, which is you have the parking guidance technology is in, but we're later doing access and revenue control, right? And that gets it done quicker in terms of implementing it with RPP, which is a positive goal. And the negative on that one is that you may have to rip something out. Is that what you're saying? If you do the loops and you decide to do the other one, right? And that could cost us, well, it sounded like $500,000. I mean, that seemed like big money to me.
Yeah, it's not, I mean, you don't have to take down the signs and change out the signage that you've installed. It's a question of changing the software and potentially abandoning some of the loops that you've installed to make it work. I should say, we came to you with this choice. We don't think there's a wrong choice here. I mean, you could go one way or you could go the other. We're going to end up in the same place eventually. I think we're just looking for the council's your feeling about whether it's better to, proceed a little slower and make the investment in a cautious way, or whether just to get the first thing we all agree is the right thing to do in the ground quickly.
If I just might add, I don't think it's only just a possibility that we would have to rip something out. I think that there's a possibility that we miss the full consideration of the design alternatives for an integrated system if we have something already in there that we may then sort of say, well, let's maybe sort of hedge our bets a little bit and make some choice. I'm not saying necessarily, but then it leads to, oh, well, we might have to pull this out and that sort of a thing. I think a couple things to think about. More than anything, this is being driven right by the fact that we are pushing up against an RPP deadline. And so the fact that we're going to want to be able to demonstrate that we're maximizing every possible alternative, that's going to be a key thing. So at least being able to have a guidance system up at the time that takes place, it's an easy visual cue for the public to be able to say, oh, good, I can now better see how to go and access the parking garages. On the other hand, one could make the case it probably wouldn't get as good public commentary, but the net effect might be the same is if that were delayed and you didn't have that, if there was a lot of pressure being put on not having parking, people would be able to find spaces in the parking garage even without the guidance system just because demand was being cut off. It won't seem as like we were being as helpful and as facilitating, but people will uptake in the garage certainly once the demand is restricted on the RPP. So again, you really get to this question is sequencing it, the overall best, most public goods that you want to see, or is it integrating it and slowing it down a little bit, the choice?
So there seems to be a third option. You could go with number 2, which is the longer one, but why couldn't we do more valet parking? Why couldn't we do like valet parking in Civic Center? I mean, I'm assuming we could park a lot more cars. This is a huge garage.
I think in the chart that Jessica showed, we are assuming that we would potentially want to invest in valet parking in more structures at the point at which we needed additional supply. So that is on the table.
So I guess my question is, though, if we delay this by 6 months, right, is there a way we could invest in valet parking for just a 6-month period to cover that? What I'm looking for is say, it seems to me from what you're telling me that option 2 is the right way to go if we didn't have a deadline. I mean, if we weren't going to institute RPP right away, which we've committed to do, we would go with 2. We wouldn't go with 1 because we want an integrated program. We want to make sure we took this in a thoughtful and deliberative manner. We don't want to be ripping out technology and spending money. So the question is what do we do the day RPP comes in? Where do those 1,800 cars park? I mean, that's what I took out. It's 1,800 cars are coming out of the neighborhoods, roughly. I mean, it might be less. I forget how many. That was with 18% or whatever, so it might be less, right? We might go with 25%, as Nielsen suggested. So I'm just trying to say to myself, how do we get from here to there without putting ourselves in investing in the wrong technology and doing it in a thoughtful and deliberate manner?
Yeah. Thank you, Councilmember Scharf. We put the chart up on the screen again, and these are just estimates. We're trying to demonstrate order of magnitude here, but we did assume that concurrent with RPP implementation, there would be an investment in valet assist programs, so that would add to supply. And we're showing a number of over 200 additional spaces there. And then lower down on the chart, you see in row 3 on technologies, we're assuming that we also use technologies to improve the utilization of our existing supplies and net some additional demand in the garages, basically. And in that case, it's a lower number. It's 60 spaces we're estimating. So both of them together are working to help us in the initial phases of RPP implementation.
So the other thing that I was a little concerned about is it seems to me that it should be a technical issue. Right? I mean, you're going to hire a consultant who's going to say, this is the latest technology, this is what works the best, this is what the best of ease of use, right? Or are there, this whole gate thing, why wouldn't you do the gate control? It seems to be the simplest, it seems to be the easiest. Why is this an issue? Why aren't you just saying to us, gate control is a proven technology, everyone else uses gate control, why aren't we doing that? I mean, why is there this hand-wringing around gate control? I haven't seen any good argument about that, and I don't understand it.
Yeah, I think our consultant is recommending that the integrated approach, and they're recommending that we actually put out an RFP that looks at all of these technologies. They spent a lot of time analyzing for us the license plate technology. And so the suggestion is put out a solicitation that integrates these two programs and make sure we get a full suite, responses on a full range of options when it comes to revenue and access controls.
And that makes sense. And that would be option 2. I'm just trying to figure out what I'm supposed to vote for if I believe in option that.
Just remember it's about time.
Let me just kind of correct that. I mean, I think even if with option 1, the consultant is recommending that we put out an RFP to look at the full suite of access technology. The point is that we're actually saying this gets done faster in one sense by integrating and more efficiently by integrating them together, which is option number 2.
And we're talking
sort of
about
come
a 6
around
month,
to reluctantly.
It's a 6-month delay at most, right? 6 months. Okay, I've asked my questions. I'll let someone else.
Councilmember Klein.
Before I return to the main event, I have a couple other questions. On the slide of challenges identified, slide 9, microphone's going to get closer to me. Number 7 talks about the lack of parking options for hourly workers. And this seems to be a matter of some debate. We've heard in the past some of the neighborhood residents say that the people the employees who are parking in their residential neighborhoods are not the hourly workers, but they're the professional people. And they come up with proof, in quotes, proof, by pointing out the high value of the cars that are being parked and how well dressed and so forth. So my question to you is, what data do we have about where are the hourly workers, the waiters, the so forth, people like that, the cooks, where do they park, and how would we get such data? Because we think that there's a problem there, but we hear anecdotal evidence to the contrary, but there seems to be nothing really to really grab onto.
It's a great question, Councilmember Klein. So I think you're right. There is a lack of data around that particular point. One of the things that we're trying to do, as you know, we're developing the RPP program in tandem with these discussions. Yes. And so we're trying to look holistically at everything and figure out what can we do to accommodate the hourly worker, given that we do have a lot of anecdotal evidence, and we do know that people move cars frequently in the color zone. We don't know how many of them do it, and it's going to be very difficult for us to figure that out without actually implementing some of this technology and implementing RPP first. So one of the things that revenue and access control will potentially allow us to do is to transfer permits within a business. Right now, permits have to be assigned to an employee, and that's based on the tax-exempt status of the bonds from the assessment district. But if we have the right technology, we could associate a pool of permits where multiple employees could be associated with one permit, which would essentially, in a way, it would help solve that hourly question, or the hourly worker.
Well. Have we given what additional thought have we given to how to get a handle on this? For example, are there other communities that have wrestled with it, or have we consulted a polling expert? So there could be some methodology. Maybe SurveyMonkey has some ideas, and I'm not kidding on that one. But I'd really like to see us have something in advance of doing all those things, so we have some idea of what the problem is or isn't. And I would hope we'd have some more additional work on that. That was my first one. The second one, I was a bit surprised to see on slide, what is it? The next slide over, recommendations to address parking problems. Number 3, develop a downtown parking app. And you have it listed as will evaluate after current actions, and indicated that there were some technical problems along those lines in developing it. And I guess my attitude is with people developing an app every 5 minutes in this area, how can this possibly be a problem? Why can't we do it virtually overnight?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, our thought was that we could certainly develop an app, and you're right, we could probably get someone to do it in 5 minutes, but we felt that it would be, we want the data that is useful as part of the app. You know, we like an app that says, hey, I want to know where to park in Palo Alto, I'm coming to dinner in half an hour, where can I find a spot? That data we don't have because the technology solution's not there yet.
We've got to have the technical feed. It isn't a question of the app and the software. It's a question of the hardware that's in the ground that would be feeding, or wherever it is, that would tell you, oh, by the way, on University Avenue in this block, there's that many spaces, or in this garage. So that's the technological. Right. It's not the app itself.
Yeah, we could develop an app tomorrow that says, you know, we have, here's where our parking garages are and how much permits cost if you want to buy one, but there isn't a whole lot of meat to that yet.
Okay. Maybe it's the statement you have in the box that says we'll evaluate after current actions. I don't think we need to evaluate it. I would assume that once you have the requisite data infrastructure, it'll just move forward.
That's correct.
Okay. In following up on Councilmember Scharf's dialogue with you about the trade-offs between options 1 and 2. Let me put you in a different place. If we said we wanted to do option number 2, but we're really concerned about the 6-month time gap that you were talking about, and we said, please come back to us with various suggestions of how we could reduce that time gap. Do you have any thoughts in mind? For example, you talked about earlier on about the time necessary to go to the Architectural Review Board on the signage and so forth. And that takes a certain amount of time. Could we, in effect, squeeze that time, or can we squeeze our purchasing department, which seems, frankly, Jim, to take way too long on any of these things? Can't we have a directive either from council or from city manager that says an RFP shall be issued within 2 weeks rather than 2 months, things of that nature? And I'm not trying to set up the whole menu, but I'm saying the assignment would be squeeze the time frame. Or have you already done that?
Thank you, Councilmember Klein. Just to clarify the discussion about Architectural Review Board and needing to review the signs and such, that applies in either one of these options because that relates to the parking guidance systems that would have signs in front of the garages. But the in terms of going more quickly to implement the integrated solution option 2, you know, obviously we could look at doing that. One of the reasons we think it's going to take a little longer than the other option is that we haven't made a decision about which technological solution for access and revenue we want to pursue and how big a program we want this to be. Councilmember Scharf was talking about, well, it's not just the garages, it's the lots. Others have mentioned, well, it's not just the garages and the lots, it's on street. So we as a community haven't had this conversation about exactly which of these technologies we want, and our thought was, well, let's do an RFP, get the information on cost, strengths and weaknesses of each of these, and then make that decision. I just think that decision, even if the solicitation goes very quickly, the decision-making process might make it take a little longer than we would like.
That would be an additional squeeze that you could put on the process, perhaps, which is really when it gets to the community and the council.
Correct. What I'm suggesting is that you look at the schedule and that you have in mind and look at each particular item of it and say, are there ways we can squeeze that particular section, step number 3 or 4 or 5, is there ways to reduce the time from between steps 3 and 4 just to pick things out of the air? And I haven't heard that yet. I hear the estimate, and I know that anybody in your position always wants to feel that you have longer period of time rather than shorter, and I'm pushing from the other direction. Are there ways really to shorten that time? And I haven't heard that one way or the other yet.
Well, thank you, Councilmember Klein. I think if the council directs us to go with option 2, the integrated solution, obviously we would try and do it as quickly as humanly possible. Our plan is, however, to solicit proposals on a number of technologies. So even if we did that really, really quickly, which we would really, really try and do, we would still bring back to the council a difficult decision, I think, to choose amongst these technologies, not just the council, but the community.
Okay. Let's see if we can get a better handle on, since this seems to be a trade-off between desire to get things done quickly and cost. The only number I've heard thrown around so far is the potential of $500,000 if we put in these loops and they were obsoleted within 6 months or a year. Can you identify any other costs that we would lose if we started with option 1 and then switched over later on to some more advanced technology? Nope. So, you're okay. So that the cost is maximum $500,000. So our trade-off is $500,000 versus 6 months, with
That's
the potential of a better system under number 2. As the city manager has pointed out, we might be tying our hands if we start down with number 1. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, but I think we want to just be clear about the schedule issue. As I understand it, the 6 months delay really applies to the delay of the implementation of the guidance system. We haven't necessarily spoken to, if you add it in a sequence way, what the total line from beginning to end is. In other words, if we did it in an integrated fashion, right now we're acting like, I'll just make it up, it would take us 9 months in total. 3 months to get there, overestimating probably, and 6 months for integration. We also need to speak, though, if we did 3 months to put the thing in, and then we begin we're proceeding with the other project. Do you know what I mean? What is that overall time frame? Because the council's not only interested in how fast you get the guidance system in, you're also interested in how quickly you get the second phase of it in. I just think we need to get that clear. If it's exactly the same, then the issue is only, have we made some expenditures that just need to be taken out, and is that worthwhile? If somehow it still makes it a longer process for whatever reasons, we just need to get that clear.
Well, thank you, Jim and Councilmember Klein. We don't have a precise schedule. I can't tell you exactly how many weeks or months it would be. It does take more time and energy to do 2 solicitations than to do 1. So if we chose option number 1 and we did these things sequentially, the sum total of them would take somewhat longer than if we did them in option 2. Now, is it 3 months plus 6 months? Is the sum total, or could you get some efficiencies? We just haven't worked it out in that level of detail.
I would just say I don't think we would do it in complete sequential, linearity. They'd be overlapping, but again.
Okay. I know we're not quite at comments, but, one comment.
I really love the council to make this decision, because we know when we choose, we're going to get criticized for not choosing the other one. So.
No, Jim, you don't have it right. Whichever one we choose, you get criticized. I want to thank you all for the really excellent staff report. I really appreciate all the colors and all that really helps us, I think, understand the problem. And second, before we get into the discussion of the merits or demerits, I kept thinking about the famous statement by Coach John Wooden, whom I know Jim is very familiar with. Coach Wooden, all-time great basketball coach, frequently told his players, hurry, but don't rush. And how that applies here, I don't really know.
Councilmember Berman.
Well, I think that's actually a perfect segue. I've been struggling with the right metaphor to the 2 different options, and whether it was penny wise and pound foolish, or cutting off your nose to spite your face. But I think hurry but don't rush is much more appropriate. So I have a ton of thoughts and questions, and I'm going to try to do this in an orderly fashion. No, I won't. So the first thing I think is that, and maybe I'm missing something here, and I'm definitely, that's likely, the odds of that are good, but it seems like the marginal benefit of these changes versus the status quo of right now really comes from the access and revenue control technology, and a little bit less from the parking guidance system element. I think the parking guidance system element adds a lot of ease to residents and visitors to be able to find parking spots, but in terms of changing the way the duration that people can park and all of these kinds of things, that really comes from the access and revenue control technology. Is that right?
I think that's correct. I mean, and frankly, the consultant recommendation, parking guidance system was like the first thing that the parking committee came up with. It said, because people like it. It's easy to understand and comprehend, and it seems sort of sexy. But the consultant actually said, you guys really, the parking guidance system you could do as part of the signage program, but really it's
what's going to have the big difference?
It's not the big. That's correct.
The big impact, yeah.
Right.
And I mean, I've been. First of all, let me start off by saying thank you guys for the work that you've done. There's been a lot of movement on this in the past year, a little bit over a year, and I think that the research that you guys have done and the proposals you're offering are great and make it very easy for us in the community to understand the different elements. I've been talking for ever since I got elected about parking guidance systems and living in Santa Monica and how they've had them a decade ago at the parking garages on 3rd Street Promenade. I had lunch today at Santana Row in San Jose, and they've got the little sensors on top of all the little spots. But that's not, I mean, as Jim pointed out, the day we implement RPP, the parking garages are going to fill up. And the big purpose of the parking guidance system is to funnel people towards those parking garages. And we need to do that. But I think that will kind of happen on its own as a result of RPP as is. I think it's the access and revenue controls that are really going to have a bigger impact. And so I'm not in as big of a rush to implement the parking guidance system. I think personally it makes a lot more sense to do them both at the same time. And let's get this right. Even if that takes an extra 3 to 6 months, I think that's perfectly reasonable. One question I have, I think Councilmember Klein was right on to try to find efficiencies in the process to speed it up. And Councilmember Scharf, was alluding to the gated facility operation, having gates versus not having gates. And I guess, and I read in the staff report that some folks were concerned that gates would be a deterrent to people coming to Palo Alto and parking in these parking garages. Gates aren't fire-breathing dragons, and we and our visitors aren't Amish people who are totally unfamiliar with moving technological stuff. I mean, anywhere who hasn't, I guess show of hands, who has never parked in a garage that had a gate? Like, is there anybody who's never had that experience? And they didn't turn around and go back home because they were scared about how to enter the parking garage. And so I think that concern is a little bit overblown, especially in 2014 in Palo Alto. And so Table 2, packet page 381, had 5 different options for how to, the potential options for revenue and access control. One of them is gates. 3 of them are gateless. And the 5th is meters at each spot. I think Councilmember Scharf, his comments on meters at each spot, I think I'm a lot, similarly aligned, where that's probably overkill. They break, the cost of repair. We have to have higher enforcement under that option. So I don't know if that's the right option. Gateless, it sounds like the gateless technology really isn't proven yet, and frankly, I just don't know if it's necessary. So I wonder, how quickly can we have that conversation, or if we're putting it out for RFP, I don't know. Is there a way, if the council were to clearly indicate that they think that gates are probably the best option, would that speed up that time frame or not? Or is that a possibility?
You know, I guess our thought was we would use this solicitation process to get more information with which to make that decision. And we also have this issue that was alluded to earlier of the on-street parking and the surface lots. And so we really, this is totally focused on garages. We haven't had the time to really think about what kind of systems we would use in those other locations and when we might implement those. And I think we want to have that, we want to go through that thought process before we land on the gates per se.
Okay, and that, I mean, that I can understand that. I have my thoughts are my very uneducated at this point thoughts would be the surface lots should probably maybe stay at 2 hour and not have the flexibility and the on-street parking. I don't know. I mean, I sat in on a presentation by, I think it was Streetwise, who they can put the hockey pucks under each street spot. And they have an app where people coming into Palo Alto could see exactly where spots are. But that sounds like that'd probably be pretty expensive, and I don't know if the benefit would be worth the cost. But all worth discussing and all worth going out for a RFP for, I suppose. So, a couple of other questions. Valet parking, you guys mentioned how, you had in mind that we'd implement that in the other garages by the time we implement RPP. Where, I mean, is that coming back to us soon to have that conversation, or?
I think our thought was bringing it back closer to the end of the year, October, November, around when we bring back RPP.
Will that be fast enough to implement in time for RPP? I don't know what the turnaround is.
Yes, we have a 3-year arrangement with the valet company that does Lot R, and it has the potential to add additional structures.
Got it. So we wouldn't have to go out for an RFP.
That's
we wouldn't have to. Thank you.
That's right.
Makes that a lot faster of a process. I think that covers all my thoughts for now. Thank you.
Councilmember Holman?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the report and for the charts. I really like how things are broken out that way. That said, I do have some questions because these charts make me hungry for a little bit more information. So there was mention earlier of the loop technology being $500,000, and I also heard something about $1.5 million. Did I mishear that, or can you clarify what that is?
Yeah, sorry. So the right now we have budgeted for the parking guidance systems about $500,000. I think it's actually $400,000. And then the revenue and access control equipment will be more expensive. That's budgeted at $1.6 million.
Okay, thank you for that. So one thing that would make this really helpful for me to understand is the chart on, the presentation, for instance, page 8 is really helpful for the different programs and what they would result in terms of parking spaces. What I don't see here, though, is the cost of these. So for me, it's like, what are we getting for what dollars? So that would be most helpful. The number 3, the parking management strategies, the technology here, we're only getting 60 spaces, it seems, for a large investment. So the return on investment there is, wow. Help me understand.
So I think, yeah, and I think that's a really good point. And we were being very conservative there, but the technology it provides us the ability to maximize utilization, but it's really a management strategy. It's giving us the control and the management that we don't currently have of our inventory. And so it doesn't, it's part of the bigger supply discussion. But we don't look at its real value as being about adding parking. It's really about more efficiently and effectively managing the inventory that we have.
Well, both are important, but for that kind of money, I would like to see more parking places be available. So, so speaking of the dollars associated with some of these programs, just so everybody knows, who pays? Who's paying for all of these? Each or all of these?
So the parking guidance system, I believe, is coming out of the University Ave Parking Permit Fund. Is that right, Jaime? Jaime's nodding. Yes. And then the
and how much money is in that fund currently? Do we
that's
know?
the $400,000 number.
That's the expenditure, but how much money is in the fund? In other words, are we using all of it, most of it, 10% of that fund?
That I actually don't know. Do you guys know?
Councilmember Holman, I think if you want a detailed cost breakdown on these, all these programs and everything on this chart, we can bring that back to you. This was really to provide context based on last week's discussion, where there was, kind of a breakdown in our explanation of what the big picture was. So we're trying to do that here. I think it's a larger or more detailed analysis to have costs to go with each of these things.
I do understand that. I just want to know if we're putting all our eggs in one basket. That's what I'm trying to get at, as opposed to I'm not trying to nitpick the dollars. I just want to know, again, if it's, we have all these analogies, and I say all the eggs in one basket, I guess is another one. So,
well, I think we're actually distributing our eggs across many, many baskets. That's exactly what is happening here. I think, first of all, I wouldn't at this stage get too locked into some of these estimates, right? I mean, obviously, the 60 spaces in the RPP implementation, goes to 75. I don't know that assumes sort of 85%, but that doesn't deal with the fact that we right now don't have an even 80%. We have a real fluctuation, and with a tighter pricing and management system, we could be at 85% capacity more of the time, and that could be more of a number. Secondly, even if you were to say that whole $2 million, the $400,000 for the guidance system and the $1.6 million right there for 60 parking, I know we say that, wow, we'll get $2 million and we're going to get 60 spaces. Well, that's $33,000 a space. That is less than it costs to build a parking space in a parking garage. So we need to remember how daggone expensive it is to kind of generate new parking itself. So.
And the 1.6 million, what's the source of that funding?
It's in the CIP. We would have to come back to you with more detail about that.
Okay, all right. And then it sort of is touched on here, but there's also, it's not exactly. When we talk about different kinds of flexible ways of buying permits, but we talk about how we can't share, businesses can't share a permit because of our bond language. But is it possible so that a business doesn't have to every day buy a permit, or their employees don't have to every day buy a permit, that we could sell a 2-day permit and a 3-day permit as opposed to a all-week-long permit or a month-long permit? Can we do something like that so that it's easier for businesses? Or was that discussed? Or is that feasible?
I think one of the recommendations coming out of this study is to look at different types of permits to sell. Right now we sell monthly permits. Could we sell, like you said, a 2-day permit or a 1-week permit? And so that's one of the recommendations that they are making that we would implement as a part of one of those strategies. I don't remember which one on the list it was, but that is something we will pursue.
Okay, thank you for that. And then the City Hall staff, we talked about getting staffers to move to Go Passes. What's the status of that?
Currently, we have 47 people signed up for that program.
And so that means we're freeing up 47 places in City Hall. I don't see that reflected here. Oh, maybe it's something that.
You know what? I think we would have to come back to you with a full explanation of that program. Some of those people probably weren't driving to begin with, so the freeing up of spaces is something less than the total.
But the
idea is those people who could use parking, 47 of them are not.
Okay, all right, good. And then Councilor McCline and I keep asking about the private garages. Did the consultant look at that possibility?
We did have some discussion about that, and the members of the parking committee, it basically didn't go anywhere. I mean, there was just feeling that there wasn't a lot of opportunity there based on the perception that private garage owners didn't really like the idea of having people using the garages potentially overnight or in the evenings. So it was actually raised, but it wasn't really ultimately made as a strong recommendation.
Well, that was one of my other questions. I've just got a couple more maybe. One of my other questions was, there aren't any notes or anything in here about what the parking committee had to say. So we can assume that this is the result of the work with the parking committee and the staff report, of course, but there weren't comments captured by parking committee members or, where residents came down. Did they come down the same way, same place as, the business owners or the employees, or what the mix of the comments was? We don't have any kind of input like that. So is that available, or?
I mean, I think that the way the discussions happened, it was a brainstorming session which was facilitated by the consultant, but all of the ideas that you see in the staff report were really generated by the group. All the parking challenges and ultimately the goals that were developed as well. So you're right, we don't have the sort of verbatim input, but the folks, the leaders in the group did review all of the various iterations of the report and agreed upon the recommendations that were there. So I apologize for not having detailed notes, but we did feel like it was reflected well.
Yeah, it would be helpful. And I wish there were, Vice Mayor Niss mentioned, like, where is everybody? It really would be helpful if people were here so they could speak up and say, here's what our thinking is, and we agreed or disagreed with Joe Blow and Sally Sue and, all of that. One question about signage. And, coming from the graphics world, I'm sensitive to these things, but I keep seeing around town we kind of seem to be getting a lot of eye litter from this kind of signage and that kind of signage and adding this and adding that. And it's really, it's like, it's not like this, but what it makes me think of kind of is going to Las Vegas when you're going to a trade show and one sign's trying to outscream another and one exhibitor's trying to outshow another, and pretty soon you can't see or hear anything. And it's a phenomenon. It really is. And so when I look at signage, I think absolutely we need signage to show people, tell people where the parking garages are. But what I'm looking for is, when you were looking at this and considering this, if you thought about, or if the consultant thought about how signage that shows where the garages are also incorporated, some signage on the same poles, where our retail is, or shops, this way, retail this way, cafes this way, Pacific Art League that way, those sorts of things. So it's all coalesced. There's only, I think 2 corners on University Avenue. I think it's only 2. One's really not a corner that has any directional signage about where you find something. And one of those signs is like so off the corner, it sort of like points to a building. It's very odd. But so I'm looking for how we can, at the same time, use pretty much the same dollars and same systems, street sign systems, to support our businesses and even nonprofits like Pacific Art League, to name one, at the same time on the same poles, instead of creating all kinds of new, different, separate eye litter, if you will. So that was a long way of saying that. Apologize.
Well, thank you, Councilmember Holman. I think we want to be cautious about that. The consultant does have a lot of experience in this and reviewed our sign program that currently directs people to the garages and really found it confusing and lacking. So that was their #1 recommendation, to kind of be a little more clear. And I guess I'd be concerned that trying to do double duty and using our signs for multiple purposes might not be aligned with that goal. Obviously, we can continue to think about that, but our initial thought is, these consultants are directing us to replace our existing sign program with wayfinding that's just much more clear about where to go to get the parking.
I don't disagree with that. So what I'm saying is not inconsistent with that. I'm just saying, so if you have something that's identifiable for parking, I'm just making this up. They could be, I think, what were they, blue, you know, and for the others could be a different color, but on the same pole or something like that. So it can be designed well so that they can cohabitate. So I'm not speaking inconsistent with what you're saying.
I understand where you're going, and I think the RFP that we're drafting for signage, it does include, you know, a complete signage inventory and looking at the existing conditions so that we come out with a product that is cohesive, if that helps.
I would very much appreciate that.
I think it'll be easier when we're able to bring back some actual imagery and some choices and that sort of thing.
That would help. And one last question is, there's nothing here in any of these programs that are being suggested here or itemized here. There's nothing here that's going to delay, whether we do or don't do one or all 9, is it, I think? There's nothing here that's going to delay the implementation of the RPP at the end of the year, correct? It's just how it might affect how successful it is by, you know, freeing up more spaces. But as Councilmember Berman said, you know, once the RPP goes in place, the parking garages are going to get more full. So, in other words, I don't know what the colleagues are thinking, but if they wanted more information, just a little bit of this, or want to ponder this, do we lose anything in terms of implementation of the RPP in terms of scheduling that?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for that.
Councilmember Schmidt?
Yeah, just a couple follow-ups to questions that have already been answered. On page 8, you had an estimate of how many spaces would be full. And I guess I was surprised because on page 3 of the staff report, it says clearly occupancy levels during the March and April measures were around 70% occupied for both permitted and hourly spots. Staff continued to collect occupancy data in May, June, and July, and during this period it was 68% for permit spaces. Now, I think your estimate of the 60 and 75 is based upon a 81% occupancy rate rising to 85%. But here you say it's 68%. So which number is more accurate?
I think in the staff report, we're trying to show that over the summer months, we actually we were seeing an increase in the occupancy of the garages. And so in the table that we wanted to show tonight, we basically assumed that, let's assume that our garages in September, when, you know, generally we do have higher occupancy than the summer months, let's assume we're at 80% occupancy. And then let's assume we can get a little bit more.
But the report did say during collection in March, April, May, June, July, it averaged 68%. Now that's through a busy spring to quieter summer, but
Councilmember Schmidt, if you continue reading in that same paragraph on packet page 376, we explain that we've seen occupancies increase over the summer months, whereas most years summer is a downturn. We've actually seen occupancies increase, so that the occupancy rate in July was 81%. So we felt like it was appropriate to use this 80%. I mean, all of these numbers are estimates, so we felt it was appropriate to use the 80% to reflect what might be in place in the fall.
okay, but you do say right above that it averaged 68% through July.
That's correct. We present the average, and then we present what we think is the trend line, which is going up to 81% in July.
And that is because you're selling more permits? Why in the summer months would it go higher?
We actually raised the caps for the permits at each garage in March. That was the last time we raised the number of permits that we sell, but over the summer, we're actually, as Hillary mentioned, we are seeing more people buy them than we normally do.
Yeah.
So that is a trend we wanted to highlight.
Right. Okay. I guess it's hard to, make projections on the future based upon a few weeks new data. So I guess we can look at that carefully. But I guess I would assume that the 75 number might be underestimated. There's a possibility of much more.
Well, I think your point is it could be. If somehow the numbers were lower than what our estimate was and we could get to 85%, then obviously we'd be able to add more spaces. So, I mean, we're erring on the right side in this analysis of being, say, conservative as opposed to what, there's not going to be such a significant change. In my view, it would modify any of the decisions we would want to make because it's still a marginal, number of parking spaces increases.
Right, but it's also what value we get out of our investment. I guess the who pays question, you mentioned that maybe you could come back with some data, but it does say on packet page 383 that the 1.6 would be taken from the current CIP, but it would be repaid as the metering options generate more money. Now, that's an interesting statement of what is the current metering income, what is it being spent on, and is this a substitution of spending one thing for something that has been covered in the past? I know I've had a hard time finding in our operating budget the budget for the parking fund, so maybe you could come back at a near time future and give us some financial picture of who is paying, and if we're going to take a chance on spending an extra $500,000, who is going to pay that and how will the reimbursement take place? I think that's an important question to the decision. In general, I'm in favor of the option 2 because it gives many more large number of pricing variables that we could play with and experiment with and see who is actually paying the fees and what impact it has on various classes. And number 4, I think there is the point outstanding that we haven't talked about of how do we distinguish between office workers and service workers. The service workers who are the ones who draw in visitors to the downtown and impinge the parking in at least 2 different ways. So I think there's a lot of variables in there of how you might want to price different uses of the parking spaces. Thank you.
I have some questions because I've learned that my fast track does an awful lot more than just getting across a bridge. And I know that VTA is putting in pay lanes down in the South Bay that are going to start to grow around the Bay Area where you jump in them, and if you are signed up for fast track, you get to use them without a ticket. And so, Jessica, you said something about how you would get a bill in the mail, like going across the Golden Gate Bridge. I get a bill for my fast track. I'm signed up on it. I don't have to have it out anymore. I used to have to wand it. Don't have to do that anymore. They go and think about it. Is that what you're talking about?
In essence, that is the technology we're talking about. It was attractive to us as part of the investigation for this. It sort of seemed easy.
It's common now. It's usually if you've got your fast track.
Yeah, I mean, I think as part of the analysis, when we did look at it a little more closely, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes to make it work. It does not have the accuracy rate, obviously, that a gate would. So there is human intervention behind the scenes that actually has to to check for the license plates that are missed as part of the fast track process you're talking about.
But is this the fast track process? That's what I'm trying to figure out. So if you have a fast track, will you be wanding it when you go into a parking garage? Or it's just going to be license registered?
If I can interject, Mayor Shepherd, I think we're talking about the use of a transponder. It may not be that we can integrate with fast track per se. So we're thinking about technologies. If you go to, for example, the garage at SFO, they have a garage that has a gate, but if you have a fast track, you can use your fast track.
I was going to suggest
we're talking about a very similar operation. We haven't investigated whether we could actually participate in the fast track program or whether there'd have to be some unique transponder or device that would be issued to permit holders.
Well, that is a huge appeal to me, and the reason why is that I just have it automatically loading up on my fast track, so I don't have to sit there and, once it goes down to $20 or something, it pumps another $25 in off my credit card, similar to how Clipper card is much more complicated. You have to load up every single one or one whole thing, and so Clipper I still haven't been able to master without getting shut out sometimes. But with this fast track system, I'm very interested in that, and so I think that would be something that would be welcomed in Palo Alto, and so I would also like to make a comment that I agree. I really wish people were here that have been asking for all of these tools and techniques. I know it seems as though we're cutting everything up, doing the RFP last week for satellite parking, but all of these strategies, I've been calling them the triple play, where we're trying to get all of these strategies going, and the relief is coming, but it will be coming in a way that you don't want to break the whole system as you start to struggle through the hockey puck sensors. I have seen the Cisco Smart City little video that I think I sent you guys. My son-in-law works for Cisco, and when he knew I was speaking at Smart City Conference, he says, "Oh, look at this." Well, they've got those discs for garbage collections and everything, so everything can be very efficient, and you can know what's going on in your city. And I think that we are moving in that direction, but I think that we also I would like to have that kind of ease of being able to enter a garage without having barriers, and without having to sit there and figure out a new method of payment when the payment is starting to grow and develop with this license imaging or the fast track system or whatever. So this would be part of the RFP. You would end up getting some of this feedback. In that case, I'm going to go ahead and move motion number 2, which would be for both the guidance system and the rent control technology. And I'm going to go ahead and just say a few more words. I do worry about everything right now, because there's just a lot that we've been studying and trying to get our hands around in the way that we like to do. We like to look at the methodology to see if we agree with you. I think that your simple methodology with how you looked at the scenarios where you came up with 1851 for the differential between what parking we needed and what we had is the kind of sensibilities that we've been hearing about from the public, and so it's giving us some sense of the bigness out there of what the problem is. I think that we're only going to be having to strategize even further, because we do know that I was just thinking how Facebook came into College Terrace with a big boom, and all of a sudden we had to order them to have shuttles to run around. Well, Facebook has moved downtown Palo Alto, not the company, but the technique of how people work. And we should have known better. We should have realized that this was going to happen, but we were in a nice, hearty recession. And but we have been hearing that the saturation into the neighborhoods in downtown has gone into new venues, and the people that are parking there are pulling a skateboard out to get to the last blocks. And so I think that all of these strategies we're going to have to stay rigorous with them, and we're trying to do culture change at the same time. And so I think that as adaptive as we can to existing types of, technologies that are already out there, so I don't have to learn a new thing when I go into a Palo Alto garage, would be very helpful for me. And so I would really like to see, I guess that would come with the no gate option, where we actually do have that ability to have it be more friendly, and see if there really is a way to make that work, in addition to all the other element types that you'll be looking at, the equipment types with the gates and without. So that's what item number 2 is for me, that it does include that. And we will see what the RFPs look like, and that will be also another long conversation about whether or not our funds match up in the way that we thought that they would. Councilmember Scharf, you seconded the motion.
Thanks. Yeah, I seconded the motion because I think that we really do need to take a thoughtful approach to this. And, we're in Palo Alto. We have high standards. We expect it to go well. And I think it was Larry's comment about, let's hurry but not rush. And I think that really sums that up. So I think we want to be thoughtful about this, and it really would strike me that it would be a scandal if we spent $500,000 and 6 months later ripped it out. I mean, that's not something I could vote for if that's something we would do. I mean, it seems inconceivable that we would go into it knowing that could happen and do that. And then it could also seem inconceivable to decide that we're going to go ahead and choose the wrong technology and then be wedded to it when it's clear that it is the wrong technology. And so given that discussion, I don't really see a way forward except for going with number 2. Now, this may or may not help, but I would like to add a, Nancy, you need to pay attention to this. I would like to add an amendment to the motion that basically goes along Councilmember Klein's questions, which is put forward a timeline for us that we can understand with this, bring it back to us, so that if we could possibly squeeze it down and direct you to go ahead and squeeze it down to the extent that you can. It may not be as prescriptive, but I would like to see a timeline come back to us.
By when?
Well, I would like it to come back as soon as is reasonably possible. A timeline of how you see this playing out, and to squeeze that timeline down as reasonably as you can and provide options. Maybe it costs a little bit more money to squeeze it down. I don't know. Or maybe it's not possible to squeeze it down. Just come back with a timeline.
Councilmember Scharf, I guess we're happy to provide a timeline. We're happy to squeeze it as much as we can. What gives me a little pause in your amendment is the idea that we would bring that timeline back to you. We're teeing up an awful lot of agenda items to bring to council. Every one of those takes...
It could be an informational report.
We'd be happy to provide an informational report.
I don't think we need to agendize it as a separate item. I just
That's what
think
I
we should all
assume you
know
would
it.
want us to do, yeah, that this doesn't delay us in what we're doing at all.
Mm-hmm. Is that all right with you?
Yeah, I was going to say, I wanted to make a comment before. I think the only thing really that is a barrier often is us making a decision and actually voting, like with the RPP when it goes in. If we don't like what they've been working on, it will be up to us whether we hold it up. And so I think that it is helpful when we have a timeline, because then we can prepare ourselves for what we need to know in order to get to that final decision. And because that's when the public comes out and says, oh, but what about this unintended consequence and what about that? And I certainly hope that we've been trying to show the public that we're being a little more nimble to try to address and attack some of these problems as they come forward, instead of just, well, we'll deal with that when it comes. Anyway.
That's all right. I said what I needed to say. I did want to say thank you for the report. I actually found it very helpful, and I am really glad that you're going ahead and, we're moving forward on this finally. And that's the reason I really want to see the timeline, is so everyone in the community also knows where we expect to get and where this is. It's much easier to have accountability when you have a timeline.
Thank you. I wanted to acknowledge Jaime Rodriguez, who's sitting behind us today, but who was one of the authors of this report as well.
Good job, Jaime.
Councilmember Klein.
Well, I too support the motion. I think that this is a more coherent way of moving forward, more thoughtful, and I think that the delay is almost more fictional than real, because I think that when you buy a bad product, and I think that's far more likely that we'd get a poor product if we followed alternative number one, then you're really not saving any time. You're just, I think, just sort of doing something to show that you're doing something, and I don't think that's really where our community wants us to go or should ever want it to go. I think there's a growing recognition that parking is a problem all over the place. I was struck by the fact that in today's morning paper, there's a survey from Burlingame, and what do the voters in Burlingame find is the most significant issue in Burlingame? Downtown parking. Downtown Burlingame, that is. Special. If there were magic bullets out there to solve parking problems, I presume that everybody would be buying it, and that whatever company that was providing that would be one of the more successful companies in the world. This is a difficult problem, one that we have to act on, but I don't think that we want to act precipitously, so I'm pleased to support the motion, and I can't help but say that I like this approach much better than the one we took last week, and maybe I can, one of you who are in the majority on the approach we took on parking lot on Embarcadero would want to reconsider your position so we could fold this into, I think, an all-round better approach.
Vice Mayor Niss.
Well, how nice, Councilmember Klein, that I'm next in line. Since I was on the positive side of that, as you know, and you're looking for one of us to integrate this into the whole. Is that correct? Well, then I would amend that we move this, that we integrate it into the whole. If integrate the idea of the satellite parking into the entire study. So in other words, if I understood Councilmember Klein correctly, he was saying, put this into the entire program instead of singling it out as the first thing we're going to do in our parking solution. Am I correct? Right. So, I would...
I'm sorry, I still don't understand what difference it makes.
So last week we singled out Embarcadero Road. We singled it out.
The way I understand it is we already gave the bundle of things that we wanted staff to address in February. So we issued the RFP. So how would that integrating into this change anything?
Well, let's ask staff. I would see,
and that's what I would like to understand. What does it mean to integrate the satellite parking into this?
First of all, is this agendized? I mean,
as far as being able to make a decision or modify a prior decision, I think the only way, the way that it is integrated, it is. Let me go back to the eggs in a basket. There are many different eggs that we are, that we've got here, and we've just identified some of the past directions that you've given us and what the impact that has on the overall problem. Even though tonight we're just talking about the parking, access and revenue control.
Try that again.
Well, maybe I'm not understanding what the question is.
So last week we separated out satellite parking into an.
We didn't separate it.
Well, we voted on it separately.
Right. That's what we're supposed to do. This is a separate issue.
We told them to go ahead and plan to do that and get the information needed. Just like we're telling them to get the information needed for this, we told them to get the information needed for that.
I'm guessing, Councilmember Klein, there isn't support for this, even though I understand exactly what you're talking about.
There might be.
Could I ask Councilmember Klein to explain this a little further?
And I'm concerned that it's not agendized, and I don't quite see how we can have a discussion on what we did last week.
Parking solution.
We're all speaking at the same time. Might I suggest that, well, I think that the result is what I would like to see, that we do this in a more thoughtful manner, that we take this not tonight, but if I can get some support from it, from Vice Mayor Niss or others, that we put something back on the agenda for our next meeting, which is 3 weeks away. And
so some sort of a reconsideration of the decision on the
our reconsideration rules, as I recall, and you can't really reconsider because that ended at you can only reconsider
the next meeting
by the end of the last week's meeting, but you can achieve the same result by putting something on the agenda. And so I would suggest that we stop talking about it tonight. And
Yes, so wipe it off and agendize it at another time.
You know what, let's just,
let's.
Now we're talking about what we're going to agendize for. And it's unclear what are we agendizing for? Are we agendizing to have the whole discussion we had last time with the same vote?
I think you're out of order.
I don't think so. That's up to the mayor, but I don't think so.
well,
I think
actually,
the
I
question
think
is what we're agendizing.
I actually would just let's go back to the motion for tonight.
And let's wipe out the amendment.
I think that, exactly, and I'm not going to accept, expanding this into what we did talk about a week ago. I think I've spoken, my comments to it is that this is coming back very specifically as an action. We end up then having RFPs come back with a lot of cost to them, but this is the bundle of things that we're working on. So Vice Mayor Niss, are you still?
So let's go back. We'll eliminate that, even though I totally understand where Councilmember Klein was going. So there clearly is not any strong direction from staff tonight. You have said many, many times that, well, you could go in either direction. It's just a matter of a few weeks here and there, or a few months here and there. Am I hearing you clearly?
That's correct.
Okay.
But we're also very happy with the motion up there.
Is there any reason, if I support this, to not anticipate that the parking permit program that we have all promised the community now, for a year and a half, would not be in place in January?
Or anything
Will you
that
take
we're
an
doing.
oath in public?
Well, so here's, I think what was said here earlier is true, that there is, that what we're doing here is just another individual action to improve the alternative parking supply that we will be needing when we implement RPP. That being said, we can't speak for what the whole public will be thinking when they look here. Let's just suppose we say there's 1,317 spaces that are still need to be accounted for. That doesn't preclude the fact that workers and everyone may say that's not enough of a solution for you to implement RPP. You need to wait. That people could come in and say that, but we're saying it is moving this further towards supporting implementation of RPP than moving away from it.
Would you anticipate that we could deliver this program that we promised, in particular to the downtown area of Palo Alto, by January? Or are we really saying, because I think it's important to be honest, to say at this point, it may take another 2 or 3 months, but we feel that this is the best possible program we could put forward?
Vice Mayor Niss, if I can respond to that. I think you've asked us to come back to council by the end of the year with an ordinance establishing a citywide framework for RPP districts and a resolution establishing the first priority RPP district. It's our intention to do that. Should the council adopt the ordinance and approve the resolution, we would begin implementation after the first of the year.
That's good. That's
and you don't see any reason why number 2 would stall that?
That's correct.
Aha, then I can vote yes. Okay, but that is, you've made quite a promise to the community, I think. This means that you're going to be moving at what will look like warp speed for Palo Alto, correct? Okay, and Jessica's nodding her head, and I know that she's very involved in this.
Yeah, no, we're going to be moving really fast ahead, but all of these things are sort of unfolding in parallel, whether it was that vote you took last week, what we're working on here, the work that's happening on RPP. I'm going to just restate what Hillary said, because I think it's very important. We will bring back an ordinance that establishes a framework, and if the council adopts it, we're there. We will do our part to get it to you in time for you to adopt it.
Okay, and that's a New Year's promise.
Yeah, and if I could just make one more clarification. Okay, so we're bringing you the ordinance, we're bringing you the resolution, and we're beginning implementation after the first of the year. I don't want anyone to think that implementation happens in a day and a half.
No,
this is going to
I don't think anyone
It's going to be a
would
complicated program. There's probably going to be an initial phase, some adjustments, a future phase, and Jessica is working very hard with the stakeholders.
And I can guarantee you that just in the same way we will meet these obligations, I can absolutely guarantee you we will get criticism during the implementation phase.
Well, isn't that why we're here? So here is what I think is important. If we're talking integrated, we're always going to choose integrated over piecemeal, especially if we're saying you could throw money down the drain. There's no question. But the ability to move forward, as I said, quickly on this is really very important. And for all of us who ran, Mark and so forth, when I ran, and Greg, it's really important, at least for me, to deliver that system. We heard about that 2 years ago this fall extensively, and I really felt that we had said that was an area we would move on as expediently as we could. It's now a year and a half later, somewhat expedient, but at least we're saying now there will be delivery by January. It may not come overnight, but at least by January we're going to have something out there that is a residential parking permit program, in addition to the RFP for the rest of this that's listed up on in the motion for tonight. All right, I'm ready to push the green button.
Councilmember Berman.
So I want to ask a couple of follow-up questions that I forgot to ask of staff a minute ago, and it has to do with the table on page 8. Because, and frankly, I think that what I've seen tonight just reinforces the need to at least study and analyze everything that we're studying and analyzing. So we have as this employee demand 1,851 spots, but that's not really the employee demand. That's the difference between the midnight count and the peak day count. But if you consider that some percentage of that midnight count leaves at 7 or 8 or 9 in the morning and is replaced by commuters that to get it back up to that first count, commuters that are parking in the residential neighborhoods, it's more than 1,851 right now. And so when you look at that net employee demand and how it decreases based on the different things that we implement, it's really, if we're looking at the RPP implementation, that middle row at 1,317, and then you say, Nielsen had thrown out the idea of 1,200 spots. By looking at this chart, that leads you to think that only 117 commuters would be inconvenienced by everything happening. And my understanding is that's not the case. It'll be more than that, because you've got that difference of residents who leave and take their cars to work in the morning. And so I think it's important for all of us to realize that, come implementation of RPP, which I totally agree with Vice Mayor Niss, we need to do and we're going to do. There are going to be even with 1,200 spots, if that's the number that we choose, and we haven't had that conversation, there will still be a lot of commuters that will no longer have a place to park. And so, as we're looking at all of the different things, valet assist programs, the possibility of satellite parking, tonight's conversation, we need to have an understanding of how many people will be impacted by the decisions we make, and that needs to be the number that we're keeping in mind as we say yes or no, we should study this issue or not study that issue. So I guess what I'm trying, not to mention the fact, and not a criticism, but the table doesn't take into account any additional projects that come online and that kind of thing. So I say this is the rosiest scenario possible, and probably too rosy in terms of the numbers. It's the right analysis for this discussion, but we as a council have a responsibility to try to address the consequences of the decisions we make. And implementing RPP is a decision we made, and it's the right decision, but we have to be realistic about the consequences of that, and we have to take measures to mitigate those impacts on people. So I'm happy to support this. I think it's the right decision for the discussion we're having tonight. I sleep totally contently based on my decision last week, and I look forward to additional conversations to continue our three-legged stool approach. Thanks.
Councilmember Holman.
Just really quickly, Mark touched on this. So the numbers that are represented here I agree with you, Mark, that Councilmember Berman, that it doesn't represent new demand as well, and which leads me to the other thing, which is asking staff, what's the next piece of the parking solutions that's coming to us? What's the next piece?
We're hoping to come to council in late September with a discussion of parking supply strategies, so new garages.
Perhaps even before that, staff could provide an information report to us about the schedule of the business registry, because that's going to be important for us to know what the density of office occupancy is. So I would look forward to that information coming forward as well.
I'll work with the mayor on what the right time is to schedule that. Okay, we're working on the business registry.
Okay, I see no more lights. Let's go ahead and vote. And that motion carries unanimously with Price and Burt absent. Now we have one more really quick thing before we go into closed session, and that is that I will be the delegate going down to the League of Cities, and we have a League of Cities resolution. So each year at the annual conference for the League, Palo Alto is asked to support resolutions for adoption. This meeting will be held on September 5th, which is Friday at the Los Angeles conference, and I will be the voting delegate. Tonight, Council needs to consider staff's recommendation to support the resolution, and this is the resolution that they've asked us to support. Calling upon the governor and the legislature to convene a summit to address the devastating environmental impacts of illegal marijuana growth on both private and public lands throughout California and the increasing problems to public safety related to these activities by working in partnership with the League of Cities, with the League of California Cities to develop responsive solutions and to secure adequate funding for cost-effective implementation strategies. So we have staff here to answer any questions that you might have about this, but this is the motion that I'm looking for to either support or not support. And I've got a motion to support, to move to support. And I have a second. Does anybody have any questions? This is a great resolution. Okay, let's go ahead and vote. And the motion carries unanimously with Burt and Price absent that we will be supporting the motion from the League of Cities. Thank you so much, Richard, for staying. And we are going to,
well done, Richard.
Yeah, and we are now going to go into closed session. And do I read out what we're going into closed session for? Okay, okay, go ahead. Thank you. The clerk will read out its items number 11, 12, and 13.
Council will be going into a closed session, conference with city attorney, legal counsel, potential litigation as petitioner, one matter subject, federal regulatory water and power cost allocation. The second one is a conference with city attorney, legal counsel, existing litigation subject, International Association of Firefighters, Local 1319 AFL-CIO versus City of Palo Alto. The last one is a conference with city attorney, legal counsel, potential litigation, one matter subject, College Terrace Center Plan Community Zone.
Thank you, and Vice Mayor reminded me that we have council member questions, comments, and announcements, and she has one. So Vice Mayor Niss.
So you have this in front of you in some form, and Jessica has left, but for those of you who haven't seen the flyer on this yet, there is a Smarter Parking Community Forum that's going to be held next week at Channing House in their community room, and Jessica is part of that, along with Jessica Alba, not the singer, who is from Nelson, I think Nelson Nygaard, Transportation Planners. So I imagine that'll be an interesting meeting, and some of you may want to attend. Oh, it's right on the back. Sorry.
Okay, we are going to go into closed session, and we will adjourn after closed session.